Good morning to you all. Thank you for being with us today. Let's start our working session. Thank you very much. We need these rounds of events as an encouragement. This is the second tranche of the third edition of Next Design Perspective. Last year in October we organized the first tranche, and this is the third edition and the closing of third edition of Next Design Perspective. I also would like to welcome those who are online. Many would have liked to be with us, and also allow me to welcome our ECHIA colleagues, Alta Gamma, also the chair of the European Association of ECHIA. So I really would like to thank them for being with us. Now I leave the floor to Mr. Lonneke, who is the chairman of Alta Gamma. Thank you, Stefania, and good morning to you all. My warmest welcome to this new edition of Next Design Perspective. As Stefania anticipated, this is the closing event because we met last year to introduce this theme, Design in Flux, which was developed by our curator, Beatrice Leanza. I really would like to thank her for her hard work, and also for this day, which is going to be rich in content. Next Design Perspective has always been defined as a workshop on creativity. What is a window on the future for us all? Window on the new trends in the field of design, but also of the arts, of society at large. So window on the future. And this should become a moment of when we take a rest, when our entrepreneurs, our managers from Alta Gamma, the Alta Gamma community has an opportunity to look at the future in a way, moving away from daily routines, just questioning the changes we are faced with, mainly in the field of creativity. This is a time of opening to new perspectives, and in line with the cross-sectoral approach that features Alta Gamma. This is an event that was in a way outlined by our design team, and that looks at creativity 360 degrees, because creativity is what all our sectors, all our industries share. Why Next and Alta Gamma? Why did Alta Gamma decide to create Next? Because creativity is the key success factor for our brands, and also because our companies, our enterprises must anticipate trends, must interpret better than others consumers' wishes. If our brand must convey emotions and able to grasp customers' sensitivity, and we're talking about global customers, then we need creativity. And also, lastly, because we believe that Made in Italy has a very strong legacy, a very strong heritage, and it also must be able to meet modern challenges. So a look at the future and the ability to meet modern and current trends, challenges important. Next allowed us to meet philosophers, entrepreneurs, designers over the past years, and these people allowed us to better understand changes that are going on, also because they had their own vision of the world, which is very distinctive and innovative. If we look at the three next editions, we also can find a sort of fil rouge, a connecting thread, a new sensitivity towards our communities and specifically towards the environment in these different fields, in different sectors. So generally speaking, a more ethical approach in line with the relevance we are ascribing to our values, our brand values, and our Alta Gamma members. And Beatrice Leanza well interpreted next visionary spirit. The speakers today are all the bearers of a very advanced vision of our future in the world of the arts, of design, and many other sectors. Amongst the themes, we'll be speaking about circular economy, but also collaboration, contamination, cross-pollination, and this is very dear to Alta Gamma's philosophy. And closing my introductory remarks, I'd like to thank our sponsors because they always ascribe great relevance to this event, our media partners who have been following us since the very first edition. They've been following us with great care and attention, and our institutional partners, the Minister for Foreign Affairs and International Collaboration and Cooperation, and ICE, which is the Italian Trade Institute that strongly believe in Next and have been believing in it for many years. Hopefully this morning is provided us with great insights, and I'd like to close with an image. This is the X. That is a symbol. It is an alphabet letter that you can find both in Next and Flux. The X is also a cross-pollination, a contamination symbol. It is from cross-breeding sciences. Creativity can generate synergies and new energy. And hopefully this happens today. If creativity before was something that we performed individually, creativity today is emerging as a form of collaboration and contamination. And this is Alta Gamma's philosophy, underlying philosophy, because we want to collaborate in order to be competitive as a philosophy. Now I'd like to leave the floor to Roberto Longo from Italian ICE, which is, as we said, the Italian Trade Institute. Thank you. I don't want to steal too much of your time because the meat of the meeting will start soon. I really would like to thank Alta Gamma. We have been collaborating with Mr. Lonneke and Stefania Lazzaroni for many years now. We strongly believe in this project, the project that allows the Made in Italy to state its value across the world. A Made in Italy which must be contaminated, that can allow the world to know the best of what we do. Thanks to our network of foreign offices, we invited journalists, experts in this field so as to allow for greater cross-pollination with respect to our Made in Italy that stems from the ingenuity of our designers. We are here at Triennale, Milan, which is the world capital of design, Italy that can impose itself across the world thanks to its design to its expertise, to its enterprises, because at the end of these days, the companies, the enterprises, representatives will go back to their factories, their plants, and will allow our export to grow. Our export last year exceeded 600 billion euro. It has been growing irrespective of the crisis. It has been growing even at this difficult time, and it increased 2 percentage points. Because exports is key in this difficult time. Italy, without its exports, wouldn't grow as it is growing, because we are the 7th industrial power in the world, and 32% of our GDP comes from exports. So after these ideas, after this cross-pollination, after all these axes that we are putting together, new products will be developed, new ideas will be implemented, new services will be provided, and this will be, in a way, given and provided to the rest of the world. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Roberto. With ICE, Next Design Perspectives also went to Shanghai, so I'd also like to thank him, because we went to Shanghai with this edition. Now we leave the stage to Beatrice Leanza. Good luck for this edition to you.
Designing flux is an expression of deliberate ambiguity and of inbuilt tension, of a seemingly groundless yet intentional movement. It is an expression intended to describe how I see a certain state of practical and conceptual affairs surrounding design in the times we live in, which I believe call for the creation of a new shared vocabulary. Newsfeeds you have most likely already scrolled through this morning being back at you the image of a world in a perpetual state of emergency, polarized between the enduring disgrace of lands despoiled and rights abused, and the relentless efforts put at their reparation through environmental, civic, and political activism. To be sure, through the lens of climate chaos, we can retrace how centuries of extractive practices have not only dilapidated the wealth of nature, but have impoverished our cultures, seen vulnerable populations disposed of lands, welfare, and centenarian traditions. It is clear that with man at the center of existential and earth-making paradigms, we are stuck with the design of a world past, one predicated on the reign of colonizers and reductionist divides of right and wrong. Designing flux suggests a willful distancing from the state of things. It encourages a view of the web of life liberated from oppressive, dominating worldviews that refutes the totalizing forces of anthropocentrism, to embrace instead the empowering notion of collective agency, of a distributed system of connected parts in a dynamic, constantly transforming interrelation. Like so-called swarm intelligence, collective intelligence is a behavioral state of things, of matter, and of living organisms that survive and evolve in the absence of centralized control. It is fundamentally emergent and situational. It is also widely found in the non-human world of birds, of fish, of ants, and bees, and in various indigenous philosophies that conceive of the world as an ultimately relational and networked system where personhood is attributed to other than human entities too. So, for example, the multinaturalism of Amerindian peoples described by the Brazilian anthropologist Eduardo Vivero de Castro, the concept of buen vivir or Pachamama, the rights of nature, inscribed in the Bolivian and Ecuadorian constitutions, or the Chinese notion of Lingan, or cosmotechnical interdependence, are just a few of many examples. So if you find yourself perplexed by these notions, let me remind you that they have shaped the foundations of cybernetics since the 1940s and still represent lines of inquiry in our computational age. So smartphones, sensors, storage media, databases, social platforms. They constitute techno-social structures in which we are deeply embedded, no longer sole agents with the capacity or the ability to choose and act. So Paul Edwards, the director of the program on science, technology, and society at Stanford University, writes that algorithmic cultures disrupt this binary opposition between humans and said structures, replacing it instead with a spectrum of hybrid agency, so choices and actions generated by humans and algorithms together. So artistic and conceptual frameworks of experimentation are today vital in addressing these complexities. So to help us avoiding perpetuating man-made biases like racializing algorithms or techno-regulation, and to embrace cosmologies and world-making narratives of other than Western origin, learning what an indigenous AI or a post-human folklore might mean for the edification of inclusive and equitable environments of life. So design in flux is pointing towards an idea of design that is confronting an augmented notion of coexistence, showing how radical collaboration and cross-sectorial research lead the development of new systems of care, of social and environmental balance, where intellectual cross-pollination helps exploring an expanding world of cognition, of sensation, of interconnectedness from the scale of the molecular to the ultra-planetary. It also suggests that if we still believe design to be a human faculty, which we use to devise tools and conditions of existence, then it is a moment when we really need to look more thoroughly at how it has designed us back. So the design theorist Tony Fry argues in this sense for a rethinking of the way that we have compulsively built our world. So in his concept of metrofitting, he states that to restore biophysical balance to our environments, we must see cities as metabolic design events. So always about their own undoing and redoing. So in a dynamic and adaptive rapport with the myriad forms of life that constitute them, including, he writes, whatever can be at risk, broken, or in danger. So design in flux is therefore a celebration of synthetic intelligence that draws from different forms of knowledge, human, natural, or artificial, in order to always conceive of new ones. So the stories and experiences that you will hear today pay tribute to this kind of future-driven, resilient imaginaries of collective participation and of empowerment, revealing how blueprints of innovation and transformation always play out at the intersection of public, private, and civic alliances to redesign visions and values of a planetary community that is in constant formation and of perpetual migration. So I'm going to conclude this introduction and then begin our day with the words written by a friend of mine. They were written a few years ago now, but I really believe they are still so very, very relevant. And the stories we'll hear will prove this. And they are the words of the designer and technologist Kevin Slavin. So Kevin wrote, "But a generation of designers has emerged concerned with designing strategies to subvert this natural default setting in which each person understands themselves at the center of the world. These designers do this by engaging with complex, adaptive systems that surround us, by revealing instead of obscuring, by building friction instead of hiding it, and by making clear that every one of us, designers included, are nothing more than participants in systems that have no center to begin with. So these are designers of systems that invite participation instead of demanding interaction." So, my introduction is finished. All that I have said will make much more sense by the end of today. The stories and the experiences you'll hear are really extraordinary. So we're going to go through three main moments. These are like three chapters that focus on a journey, a scalar, like a sort of like augmented journey. So we will start with this first panel entitled Design and the Scientific Imagination. And in this session, we're going to hear from two artists and creative technologists. They are Lonneke Gordijn and Davide Quayola. So Lonneke Studio, she's the co-founder of Studio Drift, which is based in Amsterdam. Davide has most recently, I believe, returned to his native Rome after 20 years spent in London. So both Lonneke and Davide have developed a practice through which we can build a renewed relationship with the world and understanding of nature, but most interestingly, practices where technology is not merely deployed as a tool, but as a collaborator in the creative process, and where so the final outcomes really become evidence of this synthesis, so this feat of shared exploration between human and machine. So first we're going to hear from Lonneke, then Davide soon after, and then we'll reconvene here for a brief conversation together. Okay? Lonneke, the stage is yours.
Good morning, everybody. Let's see how this works. Okay, good morning, everybody. Studio Drift is based in Amsterdam, and I founded this together with Ralph Nauta 15 years ago. And when we started, we didn't really know what we were looking at. We were working very intuitively. I'm missing my presentation. I'm sorry. I'm a little. Oh, I already. Sorry. I without knowing, I clicked through. But I'm going back. So this is my studio. We work with 50 designers, artists, illustrators, graphic designers, but also programmers, engineers, and people that are in between fields, because we combine all these different fields together in our studio. We create choreographed spaces, moving installations, and flying sculptures. And we do that with a lot of handwork, and basically we outsource everything we cannot make, but there are so many things that nobody else can make, and that is what we do. By experimenting and working together in all those different fields, we blend all these different techniques together. One of the most important things in our work is transformation. I studied design, and when I studied that, I thought design is a static object that is in use. But I found out that my interest was where movement and transformation came into place. And when you work with movement, there is a complete different communication with an audience. Movement speaks directly to your heart. You can understand it in a particular way, especially if you choreograph this movement in a way that it resembles natural rhythms. We all have, our heartbeats, our breathing. These are rhythms that are natural to us, and automatically we tend to adapt to our situation and our environment because of the movements and the rhythms that surround us. Well, nature has always been our inspiration point of view, but not just the appearance of nature. It's trying to understand why nature is behaving in a certain way. It's not about the beautiful appearance of a flower, but it's why does this flower make these petals? Why does it want to move in this particular way? So for 15 years, the long as our studio exists, we've been picking dandelions. In Italian, it's soffione. They grow almost all over the world, and those dandelions are an intricate part of our practice. All those dandelions, we use the seeds, and they have these little parachutes, and we glue all these dandelion seeds one by one on an LED light. And I graduated with this project, and believe me, everybody thought I was crazy. And I've never expected that this would become such an important thing, and the basis of all the learning in the past 15 years about how nature actually functions. So we really go picking those dandelions. It's not something we buy. We 100% dependent on the environment. So every year is usually May, but sometimes it's the beginning of March, sometimes it's the beginning of June. It all depends on how the winter was this year. And dandelions taught me everything. And I can also do a talk of 2 hours about dandelions, but I will spare you with this. But just by, being dependent maybe on this natural products that you cannot grow. We tried, we thought, okay, we should have a field and we plant dandelions and then every year we harvest. It doesn't work. The dandelion is a super wild flower. It does want to choose where it goes. That's why it has all these little parachute seeds, and it's meant to travel to new places. Every time this seed comes into a new place, there is a possibility to grow. If the circumstances are too far apart from its preferences, it probably won't happen. But if it's slightly different, evolution takes place. And evolution is, of course, becoming better. And by putting yourself in an environment, in a circumstance that gives a little bit of resistance, it makes you grow. It's the same as our educational system, studying, going abroad, traveling, constantly putting yourself out there and responding to new situations and connecting to new environments make you grow. Those dandelions we use in our processes, and what I learned was being dependent on dandelions made me very sensitive for all the tiny aspects of these dandelions. When I walk through these fields, everything around me disappears, and I only see, okay, this one is ready, this one is not ready, and I'm basically, I feel like how I imagine maybe a cow would feel the first time in the year that's after the winter he goes into the fields and can run in it. It opens, when you are dependent on nature, it opens your senses in a different way, and you can read the language and see the structures and understand the behavior. And it's not just a flower that's growing there. In the 15 years I developed and understood so many things of their behavior, and I started to question that and relate that to myself. And this is what we do with all our works. So we build a system that is always flexible, that can adapt to spaces, that is never the same, and can be taken apart and start over again, the same as the dandelion and the repetition that you see in nature. One day, I was on a boat. I was in a sailing trip with a couple of friends, and well, of course, it's wonderful to be on a sailing trip. And I was sitting in front of the boat, and I was looking, over the sea, and I did that also the day before and the day before, and suddenly I felt something coming over me. It was like I was hit by something, and I felt happiness like really crawling into my body and taking over me. I was sitting there, I was really like experiencing this happiness taking part of my body. I was really like, what is happening right now to me? Why did this not happen yesterday or the day before? What is this right now? And I realized, after being a couple of days on the sea, constantly be in touch with the movements of the sea. And of course, our bodies are 90% water as well. And also the other people on the boat, we were only with 4, we started to align. We started to completely align with our environment. Our bodies became the same as the rhythms of the sea and the rhythms of the boat, but also the food that we were eating. And I realized, this is really a moment that I'm in line with everything around me. This is how it's meant to be. Maybe this is what happiness is. Maybe this is what searching for purpose is or for meaning. When all the elements around you align, everything starts to make sense and a connection can take place. We felt so connected with the environment, with everything. We understood everything. Also the other people on the boat. We didn't want to leave anymore. We became one. And I believe this is something we are unconsciously looking for. When we go to parties, or maybe some people when they go to church, Even a football match is a moment that everyone is focused on the same thing, on the same frequency, and that is when you create something bigger than only yourself. And by constantly looking at nature, feeling nature, and questioning what it does to me, I start to learn why I was unconsciously choosing to make environments that always move in a specific way. In 2018, we created and we developed together with a big group of other people a situation and a tree at Burning Man, a festival in Nevada that is completely a tryout for a new system. And what I found so interesting, that people started to behaving differently. They started to gather around this tree and become a community. So we are so interested to create these spaces and environments where you feel this sense of community and really people feeling different. We have created a world that is static and that we feel we have control, we want to keep it that way, and always when something unexpected happens, we think something is wrong and there's someone to blame. For the opera Orfeo, we made an installation called Ego, and Ego was actually the inner world of the main character Orfeo. It's an opera written in 1508, or no, 1608, and when I was reading through these old texts, I realized that in the end, nothing happened. All our technology has changed, our environment has changed completely, but people have not changed. The problem of ego and of not being happy with what you have and not connecting with what you have is still a big problem in this world. So we created a block woven of fluorocarbon, excuse me, which is 9 by 4.5 by 4.5 meters and is suspended by 8 motors. And this rigid block can completely become fluid, disappear, transform, and become something new. It's a metaphor for transforming our perspective. Very often we use the block as the metaphor for humanity. We understand blocks. We are here in a perfect block shape. In a block, you feel control, you can see every corner of the room, you know exactly, you can measure the dimensions, you feel safe as a human. Nature is always changing and unexpected, and we learned to be in a safe environment. And we dislearned to be in a place that is actually always changing. And we respond in a way to change as if it shouldn't happen. But it's part of who we are, it's part of our system. We actually need to change. During the pandemic, we couldn't change, we were put in a box. And I think, well, at least I felt extremely locked up and lacking possibilities. I think everyone felt that because we couldn't move. We couldn't really move into this system. So in 1516, I believe, if I'm correct, I might mix up Orfeo with Thomas More, who wrote Utopia. Thomas More imagined a world where houses were built out of a material that could be poured into different shapes, that had big windows, and that wouldn't turn or fall over by the use of wind. Now, 500 years later, we created a world of concrete. And the question is, do we really want this world full of concrete? Is this what we imagined when we wanted safety? I'm very interested in building connections and understanding when do we feel connected to this world. We build a world that is safe, so we don't have to connect with it, we don't have to respond, we can trust it, and I think this is why the human race could proceed and move forward. What happens suddenly if this environment starts to change? That experiment we did with Drifter, a flying block of concrete. And what you just saw was not an animation, but actually it was a real flying block of concrete. When you put a block of concrete here on a stage, you see, okay, a block of concrete, no connection, boom, you continue to walk. But when you make it fly in a very specific way and animate it, almost like a human being, even with a block of concrete, I could feel like a sense of friendship and a sense of connection. And that made me think, like, isn't this the most important thing, to build connections to our environment, to other people, to everything we have around us? Because when we feel connected, we do care and we will protect it. So we built this environment also with 5 drifters and 5 blocks of concrete. And it was very interesting. We did this in New York about a year ago. And every time, you know, the same thing happened. The moment that these blocks came down, people in the room stood up and walked towards us, as if 2 different species wanted to meet. It was incredible, and group after group of people were doing exactly the same. So for me, as an artist, I find it super interesting to work with this behavior and create behaviors that we don't expect. I think one of the most interesting behaviors, and which is, I think, the most relevant for mankind, is murmuration and swarms. We've been working over this concept for the last 15 years. And every year again, and every time I'm learning new things about swarming. A swarm is an entity of many, many individuals that don't have one leader. And they constantly keep on moving. And it's all the individuals who have their own choice. Every bird can fly out whenever they want. They don't have to be in this swarm. But it's also not about the individual. It's in the end about where this entire swarm is going. What does it have to say about us? We are swarming through life as well, but still we're looking at a leader. We're looking at people with an opinion. But in the end, what is really going to happen in our future is where the big group of people are going all together. And we translated that in, first of all, an installation with lights being responsive to audiences. And at some point, I felt like, what if all these individual lights would actually swarm and actually fly and be able to be completely free? And for 10 years, we worked on that project. We called it Franchise Freedom. And we created, again, at Burning Man, but also at Art Basel in Miami and in multiple places in the world, a situation, a performance. This was with 600 drones. And we developed this swarming algorithm, learning about swarming, learning about how individuals can work together, what it takes, what does swarming mean. It's constantly taking into account all the different aspects of the environment, constantly responding, making your own choices, but also taking care of everyone around you. And if we look back at the pandemic years we have been through, if we realized that we were in a changing environment, we couldn't know where we were going, and we understood that we were part of this swarm of different ideas and trying out things and all together finding a solution, I think we would have experienced it in a complete different way. So building connections, learning how to build connections, I learned from nature. And I believe that these shared experiences are extremely valuable into our future. Thank you very much.
Buongiorno a tutti. Hello, everybody. I'm going to switch to English for today. My name is Davide Quayola, and I grew up in Rome. And I remember when I was a kid, when I was studying fine art, well, traditional fine art, I was like very intrigued by this sort of compositional studies, this kind of compositional diagrams that we would do about these historical paintings. For me, this was like a very interesting, strange way of observing something so familiar, something that perhaps has even this very strong narrative, this iconographic layer embedded. But you observe this with a very different pair of eyes. You look through this painting to try and dissect it, try to sort of understand this. So this is really somehow over the years became the core of what I do, the main inspiration is. You fast forward now 25 years, and we live in a very different world than when I started studying traditional fine art. This sort of unprecedented level of technology and this sort of different pair of eyes that constantly are scanning our world, of course, presents some frightening ideas and context, but at the same time, for me as an artist, present also very interesting opportunities. How can we look at the world through these different pair of eyes and perhaps combine these different type of visions and use them to generate new aesthetics, to kind of explore new aesthetics. And okay, on one side, let's say you could say that my work is really rooted in technology. We develop in my studio computational systems and algorithms to make these observations. But at the same time, Also, my research, my practice is very much rooted in history and heritage. I really like to see my work almost as a continuation of certain historical practices. And the sort of idea of the traditional painter that explores nature, that confronts himself with nature, is one of these themes, as one of these ideas. So going back to the sort of heritage of landscape paintings, I go back to this, but with, again, very different technological apparatuses. I'm interested in taking these special machines with me and these special processes, though, to do something that ultimately it's something very traditional, observing a landscape and somehow synthesizing this landscape and making new images from it. So here I will show you today some glimpses, some ideas of these observations. Sometimes I use these high precision laser scanners. They're these sort of industrial systems that are made to take measurements. However, I'm not so interested in the idea of ultimately representing the landscape as I see it, or perhaps in the precision of the systems. But sometimes I'm interested in the sort of impossibility of these systems to capture what I see. And in this impossibility, you start to have expressiveness, a bit like the gesture of an impressionist painter. There is something within these observations and what you find that becomes, again, this sort of new expressiveness, these new aesthetics. And so through these processes, this observation of nature, these computational strategies, but then ultimately there is a sort of physical materialization, and again, almost new landscapes that I rebuilt, the people that can explore. So again, the concept of en plein air, this idea of the impressionist painter that confronts himself with nature and perhaps iterate with certain type of subjects, always fascinated me. And sometimes I really go back to some of these places that have actually been painted and observed over the centuries, go back to some of these gardens, but again, with very different type of eyes. And in my studio, we develop several systems. Some systems are related in gathering data from these images of these videos that we might take. Some of these softwares are also based on simulating potential pictorial matter. So this idea of, again, playing with heritage and continuing to look at the heritage, it touches several systems that we develop. And the idea of this sort of pictorial materiality is also one of the topics. And we've been developing these systems to really paint with very different strategies. You know, what can happen if you could somehow play with this tradition without the limitations of your physical body? What can happen if you can perhaps paint hundreds of brushstrokes at every seconds and so on? Can I have some audio? Maybe. I wanted to give you something a bit more immersive, but doesn't quite work. So again, this is part of what I do. I create these computational paintings, as I call them, create this kind of observation of nature that then materialize as physical experiences. So although you might imagine that these digital works are something ephemeral, their physical manifestation, it's an essential part of what I do. And I really want to create this kind of environments where you relate to this object as a physical object, almost as a painting in itself. So the idea of this kind of new sublime somehow that technology can provide, can aid observations that may not be possible by ourselves alone. And this is really, for me, essential. For me, technology is not just a tool to develop my ideas. It's a collaborator through which I discover ideas, through which I observe what's around me. And you could say that all of my work, it's really a bit like a documentation of a process. As I was discussing, the sort of idea of the brushstroke on a canvas documents an action. And a lot of inspiration really comes from these processes. And for me, the apotheosis of the objects that tell the story of their creation are these unfinished sculptures from Michelangelo. It's been an obsession of mine for a very long time. And this idea of articulating matter as a subject is very interesting to me. You know, what is very iconic about this object is not so much the figure in itself. It's actually the articulation of matter. This is the true subject of these works. The sign of the chisel and the marks of the chisel on the stone document an action, document a process. So another of my obsession is really to computationally go back to this idea of imprinting these processes into matter, but without using traditional methods, but using algorithmic methods through which remove matter and simulate these potential processes and into physical materiality. So I'm not really interested in remaking classical sculptures. I take this sort of paradigm of the classical object, but truly what I explore is the matter surrounding these objects and the sort of infinite possibilities of the articulation of matter in itself. But again here, instead of the marks of a chisel, instead of the human process, here you have this sort of algorithmic aesthetics. And there is, again, for me, possibility to really discover very new way of approaching geometry and ultimately develop different sort of aesthetics and reflection of how we deal with matter today. Also the sort of fine line maybe between what is digital and what is physical. I always worked in a sort of digital realm. And at some point I became a sort of sculptor, although I never really touched with my hands any of these sculptures. And this also is something that fascinates me, this really strange blurred boundary between what is physical and what is digital. So here are some example of these machines that I use, essentially machines that operates the instructions that we develop in the studio. So the process of making a sculpture essentially consists into developing algorithms and systems to instruct these machines to carve. And at some point I started really falling in love with these machines until I also bought my own robot that I started touring as an exhibition. So it's not just about the sculptures, but actually also the machine itself that produces these objects, and looking at something that, again, it is so familiar to us, but in a very unfamiliar sort of context also, it's part of the poetics of this project. And again, also, as you can see, not so much about this finished object, but rather the unfinished potential. It's about the process and the aesthetics of these processes. And again, talking about the relationship between what is digital and what is physical, and what we do in the studio, which is purely computational. We develop systems, we write software, but at the same time, part of my practice is going up in the mountains in Carrara and choosing several tons of blocks, and again transforming these with these sort of new technologies, new systems. So although, of course, using robots to cut matter is not necessarily a new thing, it's a common thing. Robots are used for everything. What I'm interested in the sort of inherited aesthetics, of the machine itself and the process itself. So I'm going to conclude with a little photo of my son, also my new sculpture, which is temporarily in Carrara at the moment. And yeah, thank you very much.
All right. Davide, in the middle. I'll be on the right-hand side. Thank you. Here we are. Well, thank you both for what you shared. Of course, there's plenty more, and you know, I probably know a little bit too much of what you guys do. But, well, our time is limited. But, well, something I can tell you is that what you have seen and what, you know, Davide and Lonneke have shared with you belies great complexity. So I think you've both gleaned over that. You've more shared, you know, about what are your, you know, your ideas and concepts behind what you do and why you do it. But I think it would be very interesting if you could, you know, unveil a little bit of how are the mechanics, you know, like of the everyday, you know, work. Like Lonneke, you in the very beginning you described that you have, you know, designers, illustrator, engineers, you know, etc., etc. You haven't talked a lot about the first installation, but perhaps you can speak a little bit about how you operate in the sense of like iterations, you know, this constant, almost innovation that goes on, no, in your studio.
Yes. I think one of the most complex things that is part of our process is the collaboration between everyone has a specialism, but what we do, everything has to come together, and the process is constantly back and forth. We do develop our own technologies, but we also outsource certain parts, and part of this outsourcing is always first going to this conversation to see, can we actually communicate with each other? And are we in the same way excited about a project, and can we work iteratively? Because we work with technologies that force and move physical things. And those physical things also have like natural, for example, air resistance or a flexibility. And these are all things you cannot measure. So people that are used to have a set of requirements and then say, okay, I met all the requirements, that is something, a way we cannot work. So it's a very iterative process. Mm-hmm. We have the feeling sometimes we're constantly reinventing the wheel. And sometimes we feel we're very, how do you say that? It takes long, I would say. Mm. We now know that an average project takes 1.5 years or 2 years to develop. And then you also have to test long term. And so it's constantly back and forth between prototyping, testing, making, and everything at the same time, I think. And we choose deliberately to not work with a particular machine or a particular technique. So for every idea or new project, we want to be completely free of how we're going to make that. So we didn't invest big time in, for example, a welding machine or something like that, because we felt then every time we need to work with it to, you know, gain back our investment, and that's what we didn't want to be part of. And yeah.
And I wonder, like, how does that work instead, you know, like with you? Because I think that
instead of buying a house, I bought a robot, so it's actually a bit of a different strategy. But yeah, I think over the years I sort of became pretty good at creating problems. I mean, you generally have this idea, this main difference between, you know, the designer and the artist. And I think sometimes this could also be reflected in this, you know, not very good at solving problems, but pretty good at creating stuff. And it's all really driven by my obsessions. And again, there isn't really a clear divide between project. It's not that there is a project with a very clear you know, input and an output. It's just a continuous stream. So you have several streams in my studio that go in parallel, that sometimes sync and sometimes offset. We develop technology, so that's kind of engineering and testing and R&D in developing softwares and systems. And the output of this kind of area is essentially developing tools for me to then create the work somehow. Mm-hmm. So a bit like a musician that plays with his own instrument, that's how I'd like to see it. So there is a lot of my involvement into using these tools to then create work also as a one-to-one thing, a bit, again, like a real painter. But of course, there is a lot of complexity into everything. If you imagine a robot like that. These are machines that are made for factories to be followed very carefully by professionals, not be taken from a punk like me around the world. So there's a lot of things that, of course, have been figured out as we go. But I think complexity certainly it's one of these areas that we deal with.
And how is that? Because both of you, have done also projects that are made with others, like or in collaboration with other, creators, with fashion, with music. Lonneke, you have showed, of course, your collaboration with this opera, like director. But so how do these collaboration in a way, come together, and is there, or how do they help your iterative, process of thinking, through what you want to do next, in a way? So, like you have done work with music, you have done work with, fashion, of course, etc.
Yeah, I think everything you do helps, because exactly what David is saying, it's one process. You approach it as constantly adding skills, changing your perspective. You're navigating. Actually, I use the works to learn, and I'm learning, and what I learn from that incorporated in the next ideas, and that's how it flows through. But I think, the collaboration with the opera, for example, it was really a collaboration between the director, the choreographer, and me. And I said, I'm not gonna make a picture to the like a picture to the text. I want to be all part of it, completely conceptualize it, and work on the same level. Otherwise, I'm not interested. And I think that is very important for me, to have this autonomy, but also in the creative process then be equal, and in that way develop it. And to interpret old texts and to select opera singers. I've never done that before. Right. But it was so amazing that they let me be in the same level. And I also invited them in my process. So we all had a say about everything. I think you learn in this way, and you also learn to change your perspective. And I think that is super important, that you keep open constantly for new perspectives. I think that's what you learn mostly from collaborations.
I guess when you deal with complexity, ambitious ideas, and long-term researches, I think collaboration is somehow crucial to this, to really be able to develop these visions. But collaboration also has several layers. I mean, you talked about other creatives or other people, or people with other skills. But I mentioned a little bit this in my talk. Technology itself becomes a collaborator somehow. I mean, I'm interested also in this idea of collaborating with the systems that we built in the end. The idea of being relatively in control, for me, it's very important and interesting, and I like to have this in my work, and this comes a lot with collaboration, both with, people and machines. But this sort of lose of control, it's also an opportunity to open your mind and discover things.
Yeah. There is something common, I find, somehow to both of your works, that while you have sort of like operating with the sense that there can always be a sort of a gradient, of change and a different experience, when witnessing, your work. So you kind of both worked with this idea of creating a space of this emotional resonance, right, in a way. For sure, with your installations and technologies, and context. So context, of course, matters a lot. So, but what do you want to achieve with this? What do you expect audiences, to do? Audiences that, of course, are not in the knowledge or exposed to the, complexity of getting to, create those. What is it that you expect from your audiences, or from people experiencing your work?
I think, for me, the work is really the experience and the shared experience. So we create all this technology and work like years to make it work. But then when it comes down to it, it's the choreography, how you make that move that communicates with an audience. And this like wordless communication, communication on a level of your body. You're also not in control of that. I find that extremely interesting. So for me, I want to achieve that I create a situation, and it can be in different spaces with different works, that you start to feel different in that space. And you start realizing, ultimately, I would love people to understand their own natural system and how we function and why we feel good in this space and in this situation and not in this situation, and that we use that in architecture, in building our systems and building our environments.
Davide?
Yeah, I would say that in general, I never quite think, for me it's a bit of a dangerous territory when you create something to imagine and start from how would people react somehow in the end. I mean, this is something that I'm not quite concerned when I create something, and that's for me what is interesting. Ultimately, it's also the surprise of what comes out in the end. What I'm interested in doing is creating objects of contemplation, things that are ultimately there to contemplate. They're not explaining you something. You don't have to necessarily interact with it in a way or in another. There's different levels in which you can understand the work, but ultimately they are objects of contemplation.
Do you find that what you do is somehow, because you both dabble, of course, with this idea that, well, we are already living it through hybrid environments, and you know, like, you are speaking more directly, you know, like, to phenomena, you know, patterns, behaviors, you know, like, that we find in the world, in nature, you know, like, things that surround us that perhaps we're not that aware of. So how, you know, where do you think we are at this level of becoming more familiar, if you want, you know, like, with a sense of not constantly, you know, like, understanding our, you know, technologies, you know, or our sort of like non-physical environment, you know, as others, you know, but where are we with this, you know, like, we both worked long, you know, like, in perhaps, you know, through environments that are now becoming a little bit more visible. There's more space for it, no, to speak about it.
Yeah, at the same time, I think technology is somehow a bit the opposite of this really slow artistic process. It's something that moves really fast. It's very aggressive. It's very complex. There's sometimes a sort of disalignment in a way, and I think there is a lot of not understanding more than fully understanding. You know, when you have complex systems, these could be natural systems or, I don't know, algorithmic systems, whatever. Sometimes they become so complex that you don't necessarily understand them. Maybe you don't have to understand them, but still can become a great source of inspiration and things that can change the way you see.
Yeah, I think the technologies that we surround ourselves with, I think why certain technologies are successful is because they tap into who we already are. So this need to connect, for example, I think that is why social media is so extremely successful and also addictive. But it's in the end not a real connection. Some people do see it as a real connection. I see it as actually distraction and taking my time, but still I'm also drawn to it. I think these successful technologies, they have these basic needs for us, you know, food, safety, health, and community. And I think the technologies, yeah, what you say, they're going too fast for us to deliberately understand how it changes us and how we respond. So technology comes first, and we're just running behind this. And I think that is, I always think like, yeah, but what do we want? You know, why do we want the technology and we just adapt to it? We have changed the things around. Well, technology was always something to improve something in our lives. So I think you first have to have a goal and a direction.
Our role also as artists is sometimes to question things, you know, to question technology or perhaps misuse technology. I mean, that's mostly what I do. I misuse technology. The technology that is made for a certain purpose, I somehow use it in a different sense and so on. So I think I like this idea that somehow as an art practice, we question, in a way, things, we question technology, we remix things.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, in that sense, it is vital, you know, like if we want to live in, you know, in the world under the pretense of exactitude, you know, like, and precision and high precision, but all that comes with, you know, changing, transforming is really this realm, right, of the unknown in a way, and of pushing the boundaries. So, and I think it's also the space where exactly, you know, well, and this is part of also what we're trying to articulate here, and this is, you know, how we also transitioning to the second phase of, you know, like of today's event is like, so where is this space, you know, where different forms of knowledge, of visions, you know, of intuitions come together, and what happens there, and who are the people involved, you know, who the people, the things, the factors, the phenomena involved in collaboration nowadays. So I think we're going to wrap it up now to, you know, march on to, you know, like the next thing. But thank you both of you for what you have shared today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So, as we, from wherever you'd like. So we are entering now in the second phase of, in the second moment of today's event. And we're going to, you know, look into collective intelligence. And so what is it really about collaboration nowadays? Of course, you know, collaboration might as well, you know, be considered a mainstay of design. None, you know, little if none of, you know, design work can really be achieved by the designer alone. So, but if collaboration is certainly about the coming together of, you know, forms of expertise, of methodologies and forms of knowledge, it is also fundamentally about creating imaginaries and visions larger than what individual ones could fathom. So in this second part of the conference today, we are going to hear projects and experiences, you know, by people that really kind of illuminate a new sense, a new culture of collaboration, and certainly an expanded notion of who are the actors, you know, like involved in such processes. And so if we understand design to be both a poetics and a science of relations, then we suddenly are presented with an image of a very reticular and rhizomatic, you know, like shape, where design becomes involved really across multiple scales and material domains. And so we'll hear from, you know, chemical compounds to biogenetic, you know, synthesis, material engineering, data planning and modeling, etc. All these design processes that you will hear of, you know, today reveal also how new systemic relations, you know, of sustainment and of balance really involve different species, humans included, as well as the spores, bacteria, fungi, and so, you know, from, let's say, polluting agents to healing plants. We're going to start this second part with a presentation by Brandon McGattrick, who is the creative director of the Museum of the Future that opened earlier this year in Dubai. And this is really a unique venture, an expression of radical collaboration in itself, so that mobilizing ideas, that humanizes technologies. So we'll hear from Brandon about how they got to, you know, create this incredible place. And then Brandon's presentation will be followed by a conversation, a panel conversation with some presentation by the Israel-based designer Erez Nevi-Pana, the architect and co-founder of the ecologic studio Claudia Pasquero, who will be joining us, in fact, online, and architect Alfredo Muniz from Abibo Studio, who is also a founding member of the team that is developing the Futureverse project. So this dialogue will be moderated by Arik Chan, who is the artistic and general director of the New Institute in Rotterdam, with whom he is also developing the upcoming edition of the London Design Biennale, which in fact is looking into new models of collaboration. So Brandon, the stage is yours.
Thank you, everyone. Good morning. Okay, let's get into it. So, as Bea mentioned, this talk in this section of the day is about collaboration. Yeah, so basically collective intelligence and design collaboration is exactly what I'd like to talk about, and I'd like to provide a kind of case study for those two things, and that's basically related to the Museum of the Future, which is the organization that I'm the creative director of. It's a museum that just opened in Dubai in February. I'll sort of, for the sake of time, show some images of what it looks like and talk over it and give you a sense of kind of what it is and what it's trying to do. But essentially, it's a new organization, a new kind of initiative created by the Dubai government. It is a public-facing and sort of public-oriented museum, which basically means that the purpose of it is more the effect that it has on the public than any particular piece of content that it shows. And really what it's trying to do and aspiring to do is to help people understand that the future is happening and that they're an essential part of it. The kind of high-level theme of what we've created is that a better future is possible, but not without your help. So what we've tried to do is create immersive environments that basically transport people to possible futures. So when you come to the museum, you enter spaces that are fully realized examples of what life could be like in the year 2071, and then you as a visitor interact with it, explore it, participate in it. And in terms of collaboration and collective intelligence, this is a really important point because without the visitors' help, without the audience's help, none of these things matter and they don't actually ever fulfill themselves. So it's a kind of design which only works and only makes sense if the audience engages it and participates in it and takes an ownership in it. What I'll do now is kind of explain some of the process that led to it and kind of why we had to do what we did in order to create something like this. One of the challenges of doing a museum from scratch is that you kind of not only don't have a collection, but you also don't really have an identity. In our case, we also didn't have exactly a perspective on the future that we knew we wanted to put forward. So all these things had to be defined in order to work as a collaborative unit with dozens of studios and all of the stakeholders that the project had. So I'll just show a bit of that process now. So design collaborations is really, I can't kind of stress how many different forms of design collaboration this project required. Here's a very typical artifact of it, a kind of massive Zoom call of which we had an incredible number with various people in the project. What I'll say for this is I wish I could mention all of the brilliant studios that contributed to the museum, but I can't, but some of them are represented here. But one of the massive challenges was that not only are they all different in their styles, different in their orientations, different in their interests, they're also different in their location, different in their culture. So one of the things that we had is that when you're making something like this, how do you find a common language? How do you find a common understanding? How do you create a framework that we can understand so that everyone can do their best work in an uninterrupted, undiluted way, but it fits together in a form that makes sense and that every part sort of contributes to a greater whole. So we had a lot of different techniques for that. In order to sort of explain why that was necessary, it's worth explaining just one thing about how the museum works. Essentially, the museum is divided into two experiences, one which is taking place in the future and one which is taking place in the present. So everything you see here from this elevator and all these floors to the right are taking place in the year 2071. And everything to the left is taking place in the present. So for these future floors, we really had to create original spaces that felt believable, felt like actual places that you were in. It couldn't feel like a kind of neutral place with some futuristic stuff in it. It was as much a film set and as much an environment as it was anything else. And in order to do that in a collaborative, relationship, it's important to be able to make sure that everyone kind of understands what a space is supposed to be and what it's supposed to make people feel. So the three immersive floors that compose the journey to 2071 that you take at the museum, each has its own quality. One is a space station, one is a sort of scientific institute which is related to climate change and bioengineering, and another is a kind of spa which is related to wellness and the self. So all of these things have entirely different aesthetics, entirely different kind of user experiences, but they're all tied together by a single sort of interpretation of the future and a set of kind of principles that everyone followed. But I'll just give you an example of, like, on a practical level, how we were able to mobilize the efforts of so many different brilliant designers. So if I take, for example, one floor, which is our space floor, There's 7 different studios who are working on this. So this is not legible, but this is all the names of all the people who contributed to this floor from a design point of view. It doesn't even include everyone else doing fit out and all of our other partners. But so, in this case, how do you find a way to create something that feels coherent and complete and doesn't feel like a collection of a lot of people's different work? So one of the things that we had to do is create a color palette and create a material palette and create a sort of unified language that everyone who is contributing to the floor, everyone who is making this world, could follow and respond to. And the way that we did that is through conversations with and advice from another range of collaborators that we had, which are experts. So 2 of the members of the team were for NASA. We worked with multiple people who are deeply, deeply involved in space-based construction, and were very kind of direct with us about the kind of things, the kind of technologies you would have to use if you were ever to build a large-scale space station like the kind that we were proposing. So based on these things, we kind of directed our aesthetic, and sort of leveraging that expertise is important so that it's not like a random creative director saying, hey, I like brown, let's use brown. It's because we know that if you're printing from lunar materials, printing from asteroids, the color is going to end up brown, and then that can drive the rest of the decisions. So in the end, you end up with the material palette that we use. All of it kind of makes sense narratively and helps the audience understand where they are and why. And then that manifests itself, in particular gestures that you have on the floor, and then that manifests itself in the actual physical experience that you have. So when you step out, the walls are 3D printed. They're of a color and a feeling that is accurate to what it's supposed to be made out of in our fantasy of 2071. And this is a really important point to make, because when I joined the project, this was the kind of expectation for what the museum would be. Something much more like a kind of showcase of technology, cold, Apple Store-like. And one of the things that we did when I first joined was to kind of make a manifesto of what the museum should be, and what kind of experience we want to provide people to kind of have a North Star and have something that we can keep referring to when we kind of get to an important decision, and we wouldn't sort of lose our way. So I'll just play that little sort of mini manifesto. This has audio well, it has audio, but anyway. So this basically was something that we made to help ourselves understand what we were trying to do, how we were trying to communicate with people, and ultimately what sort of museum of the future we were trying to make and what our priorities should be. It'd be nicer if the audio was playing, but anyway. So it doesn't matter. There's a lovely oud playing right now. If we can just close our eyes, that is happening. But anyway, it doesn't matter. And in a way, I can also talk over this and just sort of explain the point. The defining decisions that we made to define like what museum we wanted was, we wanted it to focus on the senses. We wanted it to be as sensual as possible, as multisensory as possible. A, because we wanted to create an experience which was physical and could not be equaled in a digital space, but B, because we wanted to create ways for people to interact with our environments and our stories that transcended language. The other thing that we wanted to make sure is that opposites could coexist in our future. So it was a future where the past and the present and the future, old and new, technology and nature, and all these various things that actually we heard about so brilliantly in our previous panel, were living together in harmony, and where everyone could sort of feel something that they connected to and that they felt a part of. Okay, one other thing that we did was every single piece in the museum had to respond to a set of questions which tried to get us closer to this sort of much more abstract vision of what a museum could be. So everyone had to answer these questions. Where is the love in this piece? Where is its sense of awesomeness and revelation? How does it draw the audience in? How does it make them feel needed? Where is this work's sense of humor? Where is the past? So in a very kind of laborious way that I think everyone found very annoying, they had to provide a kind of schoolwork-like answer for all these questions. But the reason we did it is because we couldn't reinforce enough ultimately what our priorities had to be, and our priorities had to be on the visitor and the audience's experience and an emotional connection with them. So we emphasized emotion in a lot of different ways in the museum. We created visitor paths that kind of map the amount of time that you would be on a particular floor, but we also created emotional paths for all the floors. So we knew that in a particular section we wanted to trigger a particular emotional response, and when we made decisions, aesthetic decisions, narrative decisions, user experience decisions, we knew what we were trying to aspire to, and we could communicate that as a collective. Each member knew in their particular part of the emotional journey what they were trying to sort of aim toward. So I'll just say something about collective intelligence, because all of this that I just described is pretty standard design collaboration work. But of course, when you're talking about a really important government project, a government initiative that is initiated by, funded by the government, you have a very different set of partners that you work with. And this was, our set of partners was the various stakeholders and ministers and the sort of committee that oversaw the museum and oversees various high-profile initiatives in Dubai. And what was fascinating about this is that all of these people are really fascinating and fascinated, but they're not coming from a design background, they're not coming from a museum-making background. So the logic and the ways in which you explain things and the ways that you validate creative ideas can't be the same. So for them, the value of the museum was much less in material choices and narrative elements and emotional experiences, and much more in what does it teach people? How do people understand something about the future, and what do they learn when they come to our museum? So for that, we had to create an entirely different sort of lens through which we explained everything we did. And that was through basically the ways in which different things were represented in these narrative worlds. So for every single element, every single floor in the museum, we basically broke down which emerging technologies can you learn about when you come to this. And you experience it in a narrative way. You don't experience it in a kind of science museum, this is a blockchain. But you experience it as an application of a blockchain in a futuristic scenario. And that's a kind of entry point for you to want to learn more about it in the present. We had to do the same thing for the UAE strategy for the fourth industrial revolution. These are areas of innovation that the government is investing in. We do the same thing for the UN Sustainable Development Goals. So all these things are just sort of alternative lenses, alternative eyes through which you see creative decisions, which otherwise would be taking place in a kind of vacuum of design and the kind of rhetoric around design. Okay, so to conclude, I'll just say one thing. All of this that I've just described is sort of happening in a relatively simple context. You know, you work with people, you build a team, you make a museum. You know, it's not easy to do, but it's not that hard. But the thing that, you know, any story about international collaboration from the last few years needs to be, you know, in recognition of is, of course, the pandemic. So for us, the pandemic had a very drastic effect. It was the sort of backdrop of everything. One thing I'll say about it that is really important when we're talking about collaborations is that it had a very, very drastic emotional effect on everybody. So it's very easy to talk about, oh, things became challenging because we couldn't get together, and I will talk about that. But one of the things that I really noticed is the intense emotional strain that it put on everyone. And I think that we're in a really weird place with the pandemic where we kind of all are pretending it didn't happen or we want to move on from it. But I would say, as someone who was involved in a very intensive collaboration with people all over the world who are experiencing the pandemic in different ways in different times, it was kind of the defining feature of collaboration, was not only the limitations it put on you practically, but also emotionally and in terms of your own ability to imagine a better future and your own sort of commitment to making something that transcended this all-consuming experience. So I'll just tell one little allegory. One particular piece that we made in the museum that kind of took place and was transformed by COVID. So this is one example of a collaboration. So we have Atelier Bruckner, who is our exhibition designer and main design partner, who was making all of the environments and things like this. We had Emily Baltz, who's an artist who was based in New York but had to move to Montreal because of the pandemic, and Deep Local, who are creative technologists who are based in Pittsburgh. So all these people are working together and none of them can ever meet. And the problem with that is that we were all working on a part of the museum which is entirely about the senses. It has almost no visual or intellectual content. It's a kind of spa of the future where you go to disconnect from technology and reconnect to your mind and your body and your spirit. So that's the sort of premise of it. One of the defining kind of moments is this. It's a sort of like hand massage using ultra-haptic technology. This is basically what it looks like in the end. So essentially what it is it's using something called ultraleap, which is basically emerging and developing, evolving technology where you can use ultrasound waves to kind of have tactile sensations in the air. So you can feel that you're kind of shaping geometric forms and different forms in the air without physical contact of anything. So this is one of those things in terms of collaboration where we were collaborating with the technology that we didn't understand very well and that had pretty serious limitations. And we as humans had to be super empathetic to our technology and our collaborator because its limitations were what we had to work with, basically. And unfortunately, that process had to happen with no physical connections between any of us. So instead of sort of collaborating together, you had this kind of thing where you try to map out what these sensations that this thing can produce would be, but then this is all happening in the abstract. The actual reality is this. You're kind of having this very sad prototype that doesn't work, and everyone's going like, what do you think? And you just go like, this sucks. And then everyone's like nervous and freaking out. So then we had to figure out a way within these extreme limitations because there were supply chain issues. We couldn't get enough of the ultra-haptic pads. Nobody could see each other. And yet what we were making was something which was entirely about touch. So it had none of the sort of mechanisms we use to communicate visuals and sound and everything else, which internet does very well. We couldn't use any of those things. So we had to, again, just to remind you the dynamics, we had to basically create ways to sort of design and emulate physical experience and multisensory experience without being able to actually experience it together, which is really the only way you should do it and the only way you can actually validate it. But in case you can't do that, you need other ways. So this is a kind of engine that we developed in order to kind of create different sensations, different shapes of feeling that we could then talk about and decide whether or not that's the direction we wanted to go. And then we also had to sort of very rigorously define what the user experience would be because we also couldn't do that together. So we had to make these videos where people position their hands in different ways and we tried to understand what is it like to sit, how do your elbows feel? All of these things which are very simple to do if you're just in a room together are extremely difficult to do if you are not. And all these things had to be developed as a response to the pandemic and everything that it demanded. And then finally, you realize it. And through all the things that you're doing back and forth, of course, you then ultimately build it and you realize you made a bunch of wrong assumptions because you never tested it and you were just looking at videos. But anyway, in the end, somehow, you produce something that you're proud of and you think works. And then the final element of collective intelligence, and I would say arguably the most important one, happens. And that's, you go from this idealized perfect world to this, which is an open museum full of people who are just don't care about your design process at all. And they are just going for it. And these are collaborators now. And like I said at the beginning, the whole premise is that you're supposed to be in a future that cares about you and responds to you and that needs you. So whatever you do is okay, more or less, as long as you're not being destructive. So once that happens, a new set of collaborators become absolutely essential, and this is the final thing I'll say, and I can't stress it enough now that the museum is open and the kind of design collaboration isn't really the primary thing. It's a collaboration with the staff and the people who are there, who are representing the work and who are communicating it and are helping people feel that they can use it and understand it. So this is a part of our front of house team. It is like Dubai itself, super diverse in terms of nationality. We've had visitors from 141 countries. We have staff from 24 speaking 28 languages. This is typical Dubai numbers. They're super shocking numbers in a way, but Dubai is like producing these kind of statistics in its sleep. But the issue here again is, how do you collaborate? How do you form a singular narrative, a singular experience, a consistency among all these different people so that you feel that you are producing something which is a collective work? So you can do all these kinds of things make guidebooks and principles and say, yeah, we should be welcoming and illuminating and do these kinds of things in the abstract like a branding agency would do. But in the end, it is, again, the reality versus the ideal. So this is a kind of, again, a moment in the museum that we imagined, and it looks good, and it's photographed well, and everyone looks good, and the lighting is good, and this is what we want you to think about the museum. But the reality of the museum is very often, yeah, something like this. This is just eye candy because Bea told me that I had to show a lot of nice images. But the reality of the museum is something much more like this, where you have a person who's looking at his phone, staff is trying to speak to them and explain to them what's happening, trying to get them to engage, and that engagement is everything. Because if it doesn't go well, all this beauty and all this work and all these good ideas and all this intelligence is inaccessible to people. So that collaboration to me is, you know, if we're thinking about work that's for the public and we're thinking about experiences for people, if you don't consider that experience, the experience between whoever happens to be in the room and the audience, it's an incomplete work. So the final slide I'll show is this. This is our staff. There's a tremendous number of things that we do to try to maintain a community in the museum. So one of the things is this supper club where people bring in a dish that they made from their country, and then we have a kind of, you know, nice moment. And that's the last thing I'll say is basically, in terms of collaborations, in terms of collective intelligence, there's so much you can talk about from a design point of view, from a professional point of view, but in the end, the public and the people who are interacting with the public and helping them to feel that they're important to the work is the ultimate collaborator, and it's the ultimate expression of whether or not a work is successful, in my opinion. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you, Brendan, for that great presentation. I'm Eric Chen, as Bea mentioned, the General and Artistic Director for the New Institute in Rotterdam, the Netherlands National Museum and Institute for Architecture, Design, and Digital Culture. It's really my pleasure to introduce this next panel. Now, I have to say, first of all, that I was fortunate to be able to visit Brendan's museum, the Museum of the Future, earlier this year, just as it was about to open, and it's really a spectacular place. And as Brendan mentioned, to build a museum of the future requires collaboration amongst lots of specialists, between specialist and client, and of course, ultimately between staff and audience. But as alluded to by Brendan and Bea and the earlier speakers today, when we think about the future itself as a broader idea, we need to think beyond just human-to-human collaboration to also think about human-to-nature collaboration, human-to-machine, machine-to-nature, and perhaps in this session we'll also introduce the idea of past and future collaboration. But to do that, we have Erez Nevipana, which I'll invite to the stage, who Bea introduced earlier, but he's the founder of his eponymous studio, and Alfredo Munoz, the founder of New York-based Abibu, and who is also doing his this Futureverse project. And I think on screen we should have at some point Claudia Pasquero, who is the co-founder with Marco Poletto of Ecologic Studio. But I think we'll start with Erez, who is going to tell us a little bit about his work.
Hello everyone, good evening. Partiamo. So basically it's good morning, not good evening, huh? Okay, so partiamo, huh? So in 2014, during my master studies in Eindhoven of design, my partner comes back from Israel to the Netherlands with a new lifestyle. He decides that we are turning vegan. And it took me 2 videos from the kind you probably know to understand that I'm not going to finance this industry anymore. So the change started with my clothing, and later on, like little by little, I started to change it started in my refrigerator and moved on to my clothing. And little by little, some questions about my profession as a designer started to arise. Do I harm animals also in my designs? So I went to the books, I started to read and write, and proposed a PhD research that deals into the materials the designers and companies use, and trying to understand how depth is the animal industry assimilated within products and objects that we use in the everyday life. So I have a question, like I'll ask it, yeah. Wooden chair, do you think it's vegan or not?
Yes.
Yes, so I would say that most likely it's not, because in the glues, the natural glues has skin and bones integrated inside. And other, like in any other products, even these latex gloves, we can find animal ingredients like blood and air and dairy products that no one would ever imagine that they are non-vegan. So I searched for some purity within the desert. I got a big commission from Six Senses, an hotel chain, that asked me to design their textiles for the new hotel in the desert. So if I was doing up until then textiles that were made from wool, I decided to propose vegan silk, and instead of boiling alive the silkworms inside their cocoons, we just waited for the moth to leave the cocoon and use, it's a longer process, but we brought out beautiful, beautiful textiles. And not far away from there, in the desert still, on the lowest point on Earth, the Dead Sea, you could see in the video images of the fifth pond, which is part of the Dead Sea Works, a factory that produces potash and bromine. And every year there is a byproduct over there of 20 million tons of salt that nobody wants. So I decided to offer blocks made out of 100% pure salt and create my own vegan bubble at first, and then later on try to suggest it to the industry, like in the sense of, let's say, a salt hotel or something like this. But I'm going to stimulate this kind of process with chairs or stools, because we all love chairs and stools. And basically what I was doing, I was taking these scraps of wood and designing my objects, my stool, and then submerging it underwater in the fifth pond, where the salt is just being piling up for 30 years. Little by little, it crystallized. And with the passage of time, instead of using a non-vegan glue, I got this outer skin. And this skin really made a really strong, affirmed object that was all connected together. And basically, one will think, okay, in glue or whatever, this is very, very specific for the context of the Dead Sea. You could see the amounts of salt on the videos on the right. Like, this is basically part of the factory. So one would say, yeah, this is very specific context, but like 2 years later, 2015 or 16, I believe, I was invited to the south of France they had also a lot of salt that nobody wanted to use. They couldn't do anything with it, and they started to search for application for this salt. I was wandering around. I saw Frank Gehry's new, he built a new structure over there, a beautiful structure. And while the other designers made salt and paper, I said, okay, let's crystallize Frank Gehry. And that's what I did. I offered to start crystallizing the structure inside out. And once you visit today this beautiful building, you're going to see Luma really created this project, and you could see the same problem in different kind of contexts that with the same processes that could bring a real outcome that can work. And 2 years later, 2018, with the help of the wonderful Maria Cristina Didiero that curated the 2 years of research of my vegan design projects, we presented here in Garage San Remo the vegan design show. On the wall, we handwritten for 3 days the manifesto of the vegan design and my ideology of how we should collaborate with nature and not exploit it. The simplicity of the mountains with the raw materials and the raw objects that were there got a lot of attention, and this kind of discussion, this debate started to really grow, and we could see different designers, museums, and galleries start to speak about, morals and ethics in design. So with this big responsibility, I went back home, and I felt I have to be a bit more radical with my approach. So I went back to my parents' plant nursery, started to look at the processes in the plant nursery and trying to understand my possibilities as a vegan designer to start and use more plant-based objects or materials. Connecting to my roots, I went back also to the rooftop of my studio, and on the rooftop of the studio I started growing in the beginning loofah. Loofah, it's a sponge that is from the cucumber family, and I use it for my objects, the bleached objects that were submerged in the sea. The sponge absorbs the neglected salt. But beside loofah that were designed with bottles, one of them is yours, Arik. Yeah. Okay. Designed with bottles of people that were visiting the studio, we started growing also bananas. Bananas because in India I was introduced to banana silk, that it's also a very quick production of yarn and very ecological with leftover from the banana stems from the banana industry. So we started knitting and weaving a series of bean bags for the sleepy person that doesn't see the climate change happening. And with a movie of 1 hour, I returned to Milan, again with Maria Cristina Didiero, presenting a futuristic scenario in which Milan will become a tropical city. So, yeah.
Welcome to tropical Milan.
Blue marble. The blue, the world as it seems outside of Earth. In my last project, from the lowest point on Earth, I started to look outside to the stars. And it seems like the industry is going towards this direction. We can see SpaceX already in a marathon to bring us to Mars. We could see Aleph Farms, like a company that starts to grow cultured meat, and they send it to space already. And I started asking myself, do I want to see this kind of future also in other planets, to start growing meat? So I used water as the base, the source of life for my next installation. And I created a landing pad for the futuristic spaceships that will bring us back to Earth, because we, all of us, designers, companies, we have this great responsibility to take care of what we have already here. And with the material choices and the processes choices that we do, we can bring a real change. And I'll finalize it with a flag that was standing next to this landing pad in this landing scene. And with a quote that I wrote about it, that once we're going to step outside, life, as it will appear from space, will be down to Earth. So thank you very much.
Great, Erez. Well, as you know, we're going to be talking about life on Mars in a little bit. But maybe just to go back to your presentation here on Earth for a moment. I think it's important to point out that with the furniture that you grew from the Dead Sea, it wasn't from the Dead Sea per se, it was from the sort of evaporation ponds from the Dead Sea works. And in some ways, what you were doing is you were sort of growing these chairs out of an industrial waste material. So I'd be curious to sort of understand your take on sort of where the you know, this growing ambiguity between sort of natural, artificial, and raw material and waste. I mean, how do you see these cycles or concepts working together now?
So basically, there are 20 million tons of salt as a byproduct every year. This material is just being piled up. Nobody wants it. Because salt is being consumed less than it's being produced, like less faster. So the bottom line, this area, when you walk through it, you just feel that you are part of the Dead Sea. It's huge. It's like in the scale is of cities. It's very big. So you don't feel that you're staying in an industrialized place. You just see natural formations, and the movement of water is just creating the material finds itself on the ground little by little in each pond. So my work is revealing the last pond where the salt is just being piled up. And yeah, there are two applications that you saw. I brought the stimulation of the chair because I would say that most of the people here, they feel more connected to chairs somehow than to a block. But the first application that I really propose is think about the 20 million tons of salt every year that nobody wants. The material needs to be made like quick and in high demand. And I think the architecture world is where it should be simulated inside. So at my graduation project from Design Academy, I proposed a salt hotel. So we could see salt hotel growing in the Israeli desert or in other contexts that we probably have problems that are quite the same. And the more conceptual approach came with the chairs that the species were submerged with the sponge in the ponds, and they started to act like a salt pumps that absorb the salt out. That this was just more to propel the discussion and to show in the size of the industry and more in the size of museums and speak about the narrative of using a byproduct.
Okay, great. Well, we'll talk more about all of this in a bit, but in the meantime, I see we have Claudia Pasquero of Ecologic Studio on this screen, and hopefully this screen soon. Good
morning.
Great. Hello, Claudia.
Good morning.
Good morning. We're ready for you when whenever you're ready.
Perfect.
Great.
So, can you see the presentation as well, or?
Yes.
Yeah. You still see it?
Yes.
I cannot see the presentation myself.
Oh.
Okay. Now I see it. Perfect. Okay, good morning. I'm Claudia Pasquero, and together with Marco Paletto, I'm co-founder of Ecologic Studio. I represent the academic side of the company, as I'm also a professor at University and the Barts in Bruxelles. Sorry to interrupt, there is a bit of echo here. Is there an echo there too, or is just from my side?
Maybe a little bit, but I think it's more just the room, no?
Okay, I'll try to lower.
It's too loud.
So I don't hear myself back. Or if by any chance, if you don't have question at the moment, you could mute your microphone so I don't. Maybe it's easier.
I think we're working on it, but in the meantime, it's probably
okay. Cool. I'll try. It's just a bit strange to speak while hearing myself on the. Okay. I'll go on. So, Ecology Studio is a design innovation company specialized in application of biotechnology and artificial intelligence to the built environment. One of the key questions I would like to propose today is whether aesthetic and beauty is a measure of ecological intelligence. And for us, the answer is yes. And in time of climate change, we are often said that we need to stop climate change, but change is an inherent quality of the planet we inhabit. And we think that through the collaboration with non-human organisms and the development of visual language and architecture, we might be able to establish positive dynamic of change rather than disruptive one. So rather than stopping change, working with change in a different manner. We have been working with multiple forms of biological as well as artificial intelligence, from slime mold to fungi to microalgae. And today, my intervention will be quite brief, I would like to focus on photosynthetic microalgae. For us, it's a collaboration. The theme of the discussion today is collective intelligence, but also collaboration. So for us, is how do we collaborate with non-human organisms to transform the planet we inhabit? Here you can see microalgae blooming in the Baltic Sea, and the little white dot is actually an oil tanker, so you can imagine the scale of the blooming. And this is happening on many of the water bodies of our planet because microalgae are able to feed on some of the bioproduct of our urban sphere, on what our cities are producing. So photosynthetic microalgae capture 50% of the global CO2, but they do that by effectively eating and feeding on them. With Photosynthetica, we have been working on integrating them in cities and restructuring the microbiome. This is because if we want to create an alliance, we need to start from microorganisms that can currently live in our city. 2 square meters of a photosynthetic microalgae curtain absorb the equivalent of a large tree and can start to re-nurture the microbiome of city. This happens through air recirculation interaction of multiple forces in the environment, from the user to the architecture to the environment itself. The air recirculate, enter with elements like CO2, NOx, PM2.5, PM10, they feed the microalgae and the air exits from the top oxygenated. This triggers also other cycles because differently from a mechanical filter, the microalgae, they grow biomass while they feed on some of this bioproduct. And this biomass can become source of new resources. This has been explored currently in the Air Lab project we have at the Building Center. This has been developed in collaboration with Otrevin. We have a 3-year partnership with that. The lab is at the Building Center in central London since early June, and this is somehow an extension of our studio. We cultivate the microalgae, remetabolize in the air, but also producing biopolymer. This biopolymer then gets transformed in filament and become fully biodegradable object. In this case, is a neti pot, a Fibonacci neti pot that is can be used to take care of our health respiratory system. We will see now a short video from the project.
Through the collaboration with Otrevin, we started to imagine a new kind of public realm where the filtration or the purification of air becomes an act of playfulness, an act of interaction with the microclimate that we breathe every day. The Air Lab is really a collection of actions or practices. in the air lab, we close the loop and explore what we can do with the biomass that we extract from the purification process. The biomass that we transform into biopolymer first, so a biodegradable form of plastic that is entirely made with renewable and degradable ingredients, and then we transform these into filaments for 3D printing. This process enables us to optimize the position of this material and create products of self-care that are, again, entirely biodegradable, and in this case also carbon neutral. The neti pot is one of these examples that visitors of the Air Lab will also be able to use and practice with. And it materializes this near future dream where people will be able to take care of themselves while taking care of the environment that they are part of.
We are often said that we need to stop the ecological disruption that our planet is going through. But if we think about it, change is an inherent quality of planet Earth. Planet Earth changes continuously. We cannot stop change, but we can design architecture, devise architectural instrument to establish a different understanding of change, as well as positive dynamic rather than disrupted one.
This type of process and biopolymer that we have developed also with academic partners, they are completely and fully biodegradable at normal room temperature. And we have recently experimented with larger structure and their biodegradability and permanence. And we have worked on 3.1. 3.1 is a project we developed for Hyundai Motor Studio in Busan. Is in itself a form of carbon storage. Is occupy the entrance of the museum at the moment. Is 10 meter tall and 5 meter large with a self-supporting structural trunk, and then a canopy and a live microalgae growing on it. The 3.1 is in itself not a technological version of a tree, but rather it proposed for us a naturalization of design and technology. On one end, for us, 3.1 is a living tree, is a living synthetic structure that reconnects to one of the most potent symbols of nature that we have, while on the other end, it embodies a way of looking at technology as technological life that is designed through the collaboration between human and artificial intelligence and is biodigitally grown. One is also at the entrance of a larger exhibition called Habitat One, where we have been presenting also Or26L. Or26L is a project we developed already a couple of years ago for the Center Pompidou in Paris. It's 3D printed both in terms of its substratum, that in terms of the biological medium. In this case, we are investigating the possibility to interact with the microalgae in one-to-one through a medium that becomes part of the structural system. It is in itself a one-to-one sculpture, but it's also for us a model of a larger architecture that could host human as well as non-human form of intelligence, as well as multiple programs from inhabitation to scientific lab that enable the integration of science, research, and recirculation of material in the built environment. This type of research has been developed with some of our partners. As I mentioned before, the Air Lab is part of the research we have developed since 3 years with the ultra-beam air purifying system. And one of the main projects is their bubble playground. Their bubble playground was developed for Warsaw. Warsaw is one of the most pollutant city in Europe. The key aspect of the playground is to develop an architectural system that allows the metabolization of urban air through the interaction with the environment, with the kids, and with the microalgae colony that inhabit it.
I feel stuck in the middle. Do I send them out to play in pollution or keep them locked up inside?
Is a major problem. Pollution levels are far worse at the child's height. They are more sensitive to the detrimental effects of air pollution.
We all grew up going outside and not having to worry about things.
I never thought I'd have to protect my kids from the one thing that keeps them alive.
As a mom, it breaks my heart.
I just want to play.
Microalgae are incredible organisms. And with our technology, we can use them to clean our city's air. We have gone to one of Europe's most polluted areas and built the world's first air-purifying biotechnological playground.
This concept relying on the relationship between the architecture and the kids.
The more children play, the more the algae absorb pollutants and clean oxygen is released.
This algae is what's taking the bad stuff out of the air.
The air feels amazing.
The key aspects of this project is to create awareness that it is indeed possible to clean the air we breathe.
This can't be the only way to help them breathe better. We need to do more.
So one of the key questions in the development of the project was to convince the stakeholder that the playground was not in itself an architecture to which we attach a biotechnology, but rather it's the morphology of the architecture, the interaction with the microclimate, as well as the interaction with the kids, these are my kids, Giacomo and Lulu, that allows the photosynthesis to happen and the exchange with the air, and therefore the metabolization. We had a set of sensors embedded in the playground that show a reduction of the main pollutant between 75 and 95%. And then, so we continued this project and presented to COP27. And this is another version of their bubble because COP26, sorry, and now we are developing a new project here in Egypt for COP27. Because COP is a temporary event, we wanted to think about an architecture that is made 90% of air, water, and microalgae. These are kept together by the team member of TQ of 0.2 millimeter. And through the interaction, in this case, of both kids and adults, the remetabolization of the air happened. For us, this embeds somehow the architecture of carbon neutrality, which is soft, wet, and interactive.
Claudia, Claudia, sorry,
yeah.
it's Eric. I'm so sorry to interrupt, but in the interest of time, I think maybe I can just ask you a very quick question, and then we'll move on to Alfredo. First of all, like amazing work, and I imagine when you talk about bringing biotechnology into the built environment, a lot of people will probably very quickly start describing your work as being in the realm of sustainable architecture, right, or sustainability. But in reality, I think what you're talking about more is regenerative design, if I'm not mistaken. I just wanted to see if you agree with that, and if so, how you would draw the distinction between sustainable and regenerative, and why sustainable may no longer be enough.
Well, I would just say that we work with ecology, and ecology in a larger theme is also an ecology of mind, as referring to Gregory Bateson's Steps to an Ecology of Mind book. So in that sense, for us, meta-languages design have a role in transforming the planet we inhabit. One of the issues that you probably wanted to point out that we have currently with sustainability is that it's becoming a question of checklist and application of technology, both from human intelligence and non-human intelligence. So effectively, aesthetic can play a role in triggering a collective intelligence in which each individual and each microorganism can contribute to ecology. So for us, it's important to talk about ecology, not necessarily about sustainability in the terms in which it's discussed in architecture nowadays, because ecology, you cannot preserve it. It changes all the time. If we reduce ecology to a checklist, we are gonna be detrimental for the ecology itself.
Okay, great. Thanks, Claudia. Hopefully we'll have some time in a bit to speak more. But
Don't worry, sorry for overrunning.
Not at all. In the meantime, I'd like to introduce or reintroduce Alfredo Munoz, who's going to talk about his new future verse, or our new future verse, I guess I should say.
So we are used to learning from the past. I'm going to invite you to explore learning from the future. We're all very well aware that climate change and social inequality are some of the challenges that we face today. Innovation can definitely open the door to find solutions to some of those problems. But innovative ideas sometimes come from asking a completely different question, instead of trying to answer different answers to the same question. Providing thriving communities in future extreme environments like those outside of Earth can definitely bring insights to some of our problems. Firstly, harsh conditions require self-sufficiency due to the limited resources that we normally have in such extreme environments. But secondly, cooperation and transcending individual interest is a must in order to survive in such environments. In the space industry, it is common to create analogs, to create in a safe environment testing opportunities to see what happens with the physical conditions that are around the testing grounds. However, it is extremely difficult to create an analog on Earth on how a large community will live in extreme environment. Thankfully, thanks to the technology associated with the metaverse, we can bring an immersive simulation of a large society of such future scenarios, and to do it in a safe manner. Taking this opportunity, we are creating the Futureverse as a digital twin of future societies living in extreme environments, like those on Mars. To achieve it, we are implementing the expertise earned over the years in mixed reality and blockchain, working with a diversity of clients, including Louis Vuitton. Having an immersed multiplayer environment is needed to properly experience the simulated environment. At the same time, in order to provide a realistic hypothesis of a future scenario, we need to cross-pollinate. At the Futureverse, we are working in multidisciplinary teams of experts, including people from NASA in the space industry, architecture, fashion, deep tech, education, gamification, and many others. Our objective is to create an initial canvas for thousands of people to interact in real time in the digital replica of such extreme environment. The first world that we are creating is on Mars, but we are envisioning to create other worlds, like, for example, floating cities or even deserts where there is a strong lack of water. By creating a digital twin of a future scenario where many users can interact in real time, we expect to create a testing ground for social interaction in extreme environments, analyzing conflict resolution, new ways of governance, political and cultural models. In the Futureverse ecosystem, the users will be able to provide feedback and contribute in the creation of the environment. Indirectly, the community becomes the creators of the future. But not only they will be able to validate or not that initial hypothesis, but they will influence somehow how we could be living in the very near future. Additionally, we will be able to obtain priceless data that we expect to be available in open source to the scientific community, which we expect will be very relevant mainly for the social sciences. In the case of Mars, our hypothesis of a self-sufficient permanent settlement is that we will be working on two phases of implementation. The first phase will be obviously handled only by a small group of scientists, and they will be living in 3D printed buildings under large canopies that protect us from the harsh environment. However, on the second phase, we are proposing a vertical city comprised of a net of 3D tunnels in one of the cliffs in Tempe-Mensa, which is many of the cliffs that are in Mars. This solution is extremely scalable and is very efficient from the scientific point of view and engineering point of view in order to provide self-sufficient settlement. The tunnel solution inside the cliffs on Mars offer the opportunity to create a strong sense of belonging, which is extremely important to create a permanent settlement. Because its uniqueness, we believe that we will have the relationships of emotional connection that are so important for human beings. Additionally, we are proposing parks in the edge of the cliff that also act as a bridge between the past, with the vegetation we will bring from Earth, and the present for the Martians. We envision the living quarters as a co-living environment with small apartments and communal areas that are shared among each other. And this is extremely important in order to establish cooperation and a team-based culture. We consider learning by doing in an immersive ecosystem a great opportunity associated with a metaverse. So in the Futureverse, we are combining gamification and education together. As a result, the missions to create self-sufficiency will be handled in teams. So all the users will have to compete and collaborate among each other to earn what we are calling power units, which is a token that represents energy. The concept of energy return of investment is essential extremely in extreme environments, because energy is the anchor of everything that we need to generate every single material, every single element that we need for survival. Therefore, the economy at the Futureverse is deeply connected with energy. For example, an avatar will need to breathe oxygen to be in the environment. But that oxygen needs to be manufactured, and that means that they need energy. As a result, we will need to fabricate that oxygen and have the resources to do it. Because each group might organize themselves in a different manner and might follow diverse methods for internal governance, distribution of earnings, conflict resolution, or allow different types of roles and responsibilities in the group, the opportunities to generate big data and machine learning based on those interactions are limitless. And it can be fun and extremely powerful for the scientific community. But we also envision great opportunities of innovation in the identity creation of extreme environments where resources are scarce. For example, fashion we are envisioning as a gender neutral, where we have limited materials provided to the inhabitants and accessories, which in the case of Mars also help us to control the low gravity environments, are those that provide the sense of identity. But we can learn in the future on situations on how to be more sustainable. We all know that fast fashion is one of the important polluters that we have. But can we learn from the future on other fields? Let's look at farming and diet. When we model the amount of area that we needed on Mars per person, we came with 100 square meters per person needed for every human to have enough space to generate the food. On Earth, we use 6,000 square meters per person on the space that we use for crops and livestock. That is 60 times more than we know that we could get on Mars. So imagine if we start considering changing our habits and our diets, eliminating or reducing substantially the amount of food that we take from animals, converting our technologies in hydroponics and aquaponics. That means that we will have a lot of space that will be available to create reforestation and therefore immediately start helping our planet. So, in summary, the metaverse offers an opportunity to create a simulation that can take us to the future in extremely harsh environments so we can learn from it. And by doing so, we will be able to substantially have an impact in today's life. Thank you so much.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Alfredo. That's super exciting. I mean, you started your presentation just now with the question, we learn from the past, but can we learn from the future? And I'm actually wondering how different the past and the future are, because when we talk about the future the way we're talking about it these days, and going back to one of the slides that Brendan showed, all these things, AI, autonomous vehicles, Internet of Things, these were all imagined 50, 100 years ago. And in many ways, the future that we're sort of chasing after now is actually the future as it was envisioned in the past or by the past. And the question is, do we need to be a little bit more careful about it? As the future becomes the past's self-fulfilling prophecy, do we need to be more careful? The sort of famous example now being the metaverse, right? As many people may know, the metaverse was actually is actually a term that was coined 30 years ago by the writer Neil Stephenson in his novel Snow Crash, and it was meant as a cautionary tale, a dystopia that we should try to avoid. Meanwhile, 30 years ago, we're all sort of barreling towards the metaverse with a near total abandon. Now, in bringing sort of collaboration into your futureverse, I'm wondering, besides the sort of technical aspects of how you build a future on Mars, does collaboration also bring in other kinds of points of view, that may also help us inform what this future might look like beyond from a technological sense, but also from a social, cultural, political one?
Totally. And I really appreciate that question, because I think cross-pollination and working in multidisciplinary teams is the answer to that question. When we started working with planetary geologists, astrobiologists, and all the more than 30 plus experts, we didn't know how Mars was going to be. And a lot of the ideas came from the influence in movies, right? Like Space Odyssey, everything very white, very neutral. Kind of, we all have these associations of the future, like everything is very pure and clean. But then when we started to understand the challenges of how to source materials in a place where there is nothing, where we cannot rely to send things from Earth because of the distance and the orbits, then everything started to shape out. And also the role of us architects, we started to think, okay, how would we want people to actually live in a place that they're not going to probably come back? So all of those pre-thoughts about how a potential future was going to be that you were indicating started to fall apart by mixing the requirements from the scientific community with our expertise as designers and artists and architects to question a lot of the things. And the opportunity that we have with what we are doing with the Futures is that by creating an initial canvas, the community can start to come into place and potentially say, listen, this is not what we are enjoying. This is not how we see ourselves living. Or yes, this is something that adds value and we want to add and continue evolving that organism that is that moving a digital twin. That's the advantage. It can change depending on the feedback that we get from the entire community.
Cool. I don't know if Claudia or Erez, you have any thoughts on this? Or, I mean, if not, we can move on. But well, I mean, Claudia, you guys must be described as being futuristic all the time. I mean, what is your take on how we should approach the future, and in what sense collaboration can sort of guide different futures or allow for the possibility of different futures? Or maybe you can't hear us. No, all right. Well, while we work on that, maybe I'll ask Erez, this idea of a vegan design. I mean, it of course sort of translates into a lot of areas of biomaterials and so on that a lot of companies, I imagine. Oh, hello.
Can you hear me well? Because I have some problem with the connection. I don't hear you very well.
Now we can hear you. Can you hear us?
Okay.
Yeah.
So you were asking how we imagine the future.
Yeah, something like that. Let's just go with it. Yeah.
Well, I often say that I imagine the future like my grandma courtyard, basically. So like there is some element of the pre-industrial society that interests me. I come from a family of wine producer, actually, and I then took off doing something totally different. And what interests me of how wine was made a few years ago, not far from where you are at the moment, is the south of Piedmont, the Lonneke. It's the relationship between social system, pleasure, and production. Of course, producing wine was the main activity sustaining the family, but there was a whole set of events that have their own aesthetic, their own social value, their own politics associated with it. And you could not districate one from the other. So if I would not propose the same material system that my grandma would use to produce their house, I would propose a similar relational system that was collective and maybe integrate even more in the collective. So the cultivation of algae, for example, that I discussed today, exists as a biotechnology. Algae farm exists, but are often far from the city. What we are doing is not reinventing a technology, but integrated in architecture. And eventually, through aesthetic, establish a different relationship where ecology becomes an aspect also of pleasure, visual and other pleasure. Microalgae, you can also feed with them, eat them. They are very proteic. So there are elements in which we interact differently with the planet, and biotechnology is embedded, and we establish a human, non-human relationship. That's somehow how I visualize the change of relationship that we have. And then for how I envision the future, we should sit down and draw, maybe also with some algorithms, some algae. But yeah.
Great, thank you.
That's my answer.
Thank you, Claudia. I'm told we're running low on time, but maybe a final question for Erez is a good way to end this, because with your, as I was saying, your vegan design, I imagine sort of maybe framed slightly differently would resonate with a number of people in the audience whose companies that they're working with or for are looking at things like biomaterials, all those mushroom leathers and so on and so forth. I mean, for you, like how your work is looking at the relationship between humans and nature, the sort of human-nature collaboration. Where do you think industry then can come back in to this collaboration?
Yeah, I think they're already in it, because if you imagine any product design company here, at the end, they also use nature, wooden, like wood that they use. They need to understand, I think, what is really important for the future, that we start to understand the origins of the materials that we use as big companies. We could see it like in the chocolate industry, that they start to speak about these kind of things, that this kind of understanding of the origin, of the roots of the materials that we use in a global world is very, very important for the future. And as a vegan designer, yeah, maybe I started with small things in the plant nursery of my parents and stuff, but we could see that Dead Sea is being like the same problem could be in another context, like so far, like in France, or the silk, the banana silk that we see. We have 150 countries that grow bananas around the world, and they cut their stems, they throw it away. So think about how many suppliers that can bring banana silk to the industry. And yeah, so we should be very conscious about the origins of the materials and be very open to start using different kind of plant-based materials, I would say.
Okay, great. So you heard it here first. Banana silk is the new mycelium.
Yeah.
So on that note, thank you, Ares, thank you, Claudia, and thank you, Alfredo. And thanks to all of you guys for listening.
Thanks, Claudia. Well, she's gone, but, we'll text her. So we are entering into the third and last part of today's event together. So we have heard now stories of, how we can come together in terms of, creating new alliances among, ways of thinking, of researching, of acting. And so in this last panel, titled Design Thinking in Action, we are really going to listen to stories that speak of how, in fact, we can bring about systemic transformation and what that really means in getting all of the stakeholders, at the table and involved. So this concluding session, I'm very happy to say it's a product of a collaboration with the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, which has been championing for over 10 years now an acceleration towards a circular economy. So we have put together this panel to, speak of this, larger, more complex, so system-based forms of change. So this conversation is centered around food systems. Food, so the way it is produced, where it is sourced, as we have just heard, how it is stored, distributed, or consumed represents really the crucible of all our social, environmental, and if you want, economic challenges as we are facing them, like nowadays. So, and while food connects us all clearly, it also divides us. As access to good nutrition, food waste and land spoliation are still rampant and often abating on the life of the most vulnerable. So the voices and experiences that you're going to hear today really are kind of showing how creativity, entrepreneurship, and also activism become involved in creating sort of natural positive food, regenerative cultivation, but also cultural, educational, and industrial practices that are planet-centric and can therefore spur inclusive and equitable agency. So these conversations will see Gaëlle Legellard from, in fact, the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. She's an expert in food design. And she's going to be joined by John Gray online. He's joining us from LA, if I am not wrong. He is the co-founder of the Bronx-based food collective Ghetto Gastro that really intersects fashion, design, activism, music, and etc. to promote food as culture and as freedom. And then the third speaker is Matteo Vignoli, is the co-founder of the global yet Italy-based think tank and social enterprise Future Food Institute, and their conversation is moderated by the writer, editor, and journalist Spencer Bailey, who is based in New York, and he is the co-founder of the media company The Slowdown, and among many other things, he's also serving as editor-at-large of the publisher Phaidon. So I am inviting you all on stage so we can begin.
So I know we have lunch coming up, so we'll try and be relatively quick and get this moving. But I did first want to say just a quick background. So as Bea mentioned, I'm Spencer Bailey. I'm the co-founder of The Slowdown. We're a New York-based media company, which I launched with Andrew Zuckerman just around 3.5 years ago. So pre-pandemic, but it was interesting to be a company called The Slowdown and then find ourselves in a global slowdown. And from the start, our mission has been to tell stories at the intersection of culture, nature, and the future. We make 2 podcasts, a weekly newsletter, and a website where we bring together leading-edge perspectives across various disciplines to capture an emerging worldview, and this talk today will be certainly an example of that. Our aim really through everything we do is to illuminate a new kind of luxury. We're emphasizing time and nature, concern for the planet, intersectional perspectives, and a deep appreciation of craft. So, which leads me to today's panel, Design Thinking in Action, which Bea named, I didn't, and we'll get into that. I have issues with design thinking as a sort of concept, but I think there's a lot of great things there. Joining me, as mentioned, will be Gaëlle Gillard, the design manager at the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, and Matteo Vignoli, the founder of the Future Food Institute. And on screen, calling in from Los Angeles, will be John Gray, the co-founder of the culinary collective Ghetto Gastro. So without further ado, come to the stage. See if we can get John up on the screen. Hopefully. Okay, yeah, I'll begin and then we'll bring John in. But welcome, Gaëlle and Matteo.
Thank you.
I wanted to begin today's talk on the word company. So we all work with them or for them, and we're here to talk about design in food. So I wanted to bring up the etymology of the word company. I was recently in a conversation with Frances Moore Lappé. I don't know if anyone's familiar with Frances or her work, but she, in 1971, wrote a book called Diet for a Small Planet. And when I was speaking with her, she brought up the etymology of the word company, and she goes, well, it's com, with, and pan, bread. And I'd never really thought about it this way, this idea of a company as sort of a form of breaking bread. But I was wondering how each of you think about this word company in the work you do, and how this breaking bread notion might apply to that.
Should I start? Yeah, that's really interesting, actually, because it relates so much with the work we do at the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, where it's really about, if you're breaking bread, you need to be around the table together, right? So bringing the entire system around the table to talk, because we launched a report on the food system a year ago. At the very beginning of the process, we interviewed a lot of people, went to talk to farmers, we talked to food brands, we talked to retailers. And what was really interesting is each of them were saying, like, so what's the problem? Who has the most influence? Where can we start the change? And they were all saying, well, the retailers, they have so much power. And the retailers were saying, well, the food brands. And then, no, it's the farmers, because they decide how to grow things. And the brands would say, well, the consumers, because they buy. So they were all blaming each other, like a little dance. And back to that idea of breaking the bread together, what we did is we were like, okay, well, we're just going to put you in one room together, and you can't, the blame cannot continue turning around the room forever. So we sat them down and we started chatting with each other, and suddenly the ideas started to emerge beyond this idea of blame and beyond, and starting into like collaboration and cooperation. Where do we want to go? What is the vision for this? So actually the physical act of sitting together around a table was what started this company, or the system of the food system.
And Matteo, it's maybe an obvious question being someone based in Bologna running the Future Food Institute, but talk a little bit about this breaking bread idea and the work you do.
Thank you for the question, because bread is an example I always use when I explain what we do. As talking about the future of food in Italy was not an easy task at the beginning. 10 years ago, we went together with Sarah, we founded Future Food. People were like, what? We really want to change food. Are you kidding me? With some issue in the table, when with my relatives saying, why do we need to change tortellini? And with this question, we really had to understand the basic of what defines us, which is tradition. And bread is actually one of the most traditional products. We've been, as humanity, breaking bread together since 14,000 years. And yet, bread has been going through several transformations. Like we were basically grinding, grains, together with stones, and then somebody invented, mills, and then. In the Egyptian times, we had people discovering yeast when there was no idea of what microorganisms were about, and then in the Roman time in Italy, they invented like the machine, like the mill that was basically operated by animals, and bread has become a form that we kind of understand today. And since those time, bread has become as like the most traditional product in many countries. We've been breaking bread together as humanity in several ways. But if you think about the history of bread, it's not an history of tradition. It has been going through several innovation, technology, biotechnology. Right now, it's made in several forms in different ways. And you can understand the link between, tradition and innovation. And we had to understand that to actually, be able to talk about the future of food, as we conceived a tradition as a very successful innovation. And the more successful innovation it is, the more we are able to actually, think about the future, so that we can actually break bread together in the future as we are creating new tradition through our, ideas and innovation. So in bread, there is this idea of collaboration. There is the idea of, bringing that to the future, as we know that it's not given for granted. We had the notion that wheat, it's not easy access product. There can be disruptions in our supply chain. So we need to continue working on this to be able to share food in the future and preserve our tradition through working on it from an innovation standpoint.
So John currently isn't connected or able to join us. We're hoping to be able to get in touch with him, and we'll have him dialed in if he does call in. I know he's in Los Angeles and it's 3 a.m. and so who knows. Anyway, just to move on, Matteo, when we spoke last week, you talked to me about this distinction between collaboration and cooperation, and I wanted to bring this up here because it's sort of this embodiment of the work you do. And, I was just thinking this idea of like, we don't save the world alone. I'm thinking also, we're here with the Alta Gamma Foundation, which is an organization rooted in the notion of cooperation as well as collaboration. Where do you see the distinction kind of between the two, and what is this importance or emphasis that you place on cooperation in your work? And maybe share an example. I know you mentioned one to me, so.
We're a small organization, and we decided that our way forward was to work with others. And once Nietzsche said that if you know why, then you can work anyhow. So we studied how people collaborate. And we understood that, collaboration is sharing means, okay? We collaborate a lot with our supplier, with our customer. I mean, I put this, you put that, and that's kind of, the basic of collaboration. But cooperation is a different form. It's sharing, ends, sharing why we're doing things together. And, around the table, you sit with others because you want to share the values that, bring everybody at the table. So when we collaborate with industry, and our aim is to foster something that it's not possible alone. Like making sure that, through having the same ends and the same goals and the same values, humanity can achieve something which is exceeding what you can do alone. And once I had a CFO of a global company, and actually one of the biggest food company in the world, he was saying to me, like, we understood that when we are talking about sustainability, and that was basically in the coffee industry, we cannot work only by ourselves. We cannot think that this challenge is what we put on our, reports. We need to conceive that the future of our industry and our planet, it belongs to everybody. So they were able...
Spaceship Earth. I mean, we're all, it's the Buckminster Fuller idea, Spaceship Earth, and that connectedness, which goes to this cooperation idea, I think is so important. And yeah, so maybe elaborate a little more on this story of these two companies coming together.
No, they decided to create a common fund to invest in startups, technologies, and research to actually understand and contribute to regenerate the world around their business and beyond. And he was sharing with me, like, we would never been done in the past. This is like something that come to our understanding after we see the world as a collective effort. And it has all been like this, but only if we are able to anticipate the challenges that we have in front of us, to work before with design, that we are able to anticipate and ensure that those issues are not happening, or in a way reduced, not in the urgency, because those global issues and systemic problems cannot be tackled with these urgent and kind of cut through simple countermeasures. They just simply don't work. They create major issues elsewhere. And yeah, I've seen that some people are thinking that Planet B is a solution, that, yeah, we could live on Mars. We care more of Planet A and ensuring that, we can keep sharing bread among ourselves and with nature.
And Gael, could you share how you bring this sort of thinking, this cooperation thinking into your work, and perhaps touching on the regenerative circular idea?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the circular economy, I don't know if, can I have a show of hands who knows what the circular economy is? Just so okay, so I'm just going to do a little on the side so I can explain. So we live in this linear economy. So we extract resources out of the ground, we make products, we use them for a very short amount of time, and then we waste them. That's the system we're in. The circular economy is about saying, can we, instead of making and wasting, can we have an economy that is based on 3 different principles that are circulate. So can you what you need, can you circulate for as long as possible at its highest value? Eliminate, so whatever we don't need, can we just eliminate from the design stage? And I hope we'll talk a little bit about how important design is to all of this ecological, sustainable, and regenerative thinking. And the last one is regenerative. So that means it's an economy where everything we do regenerate nature. So the soil is better off after we've grown the plant, for example. So that's a circular economy where waste is designed out from the start. And the blessing and the curse of the circular economy is you can't do it on your own, or you have a lot of mini circles. But if you really think about, if you're selling clothes and you want to do repair or resell of your clothes, you're going to need a lot of people with you to collaborate with you. You can have the same vision, but you're going to need a lot of people to help you. You're going to need your suppliers to help you. You're going to need to make sure everybody's in. You're going to have the logistics to take back all these clothes and transform them, refurbish them, repair them, and resell them to your consumers. So if you put in place a rental system, it's the same. So the circular economy by essence is about collaboration. And so that's a lot of the work we do is, for example, last week I was in Stockholm and we had a big workshop where we bring all of our networks, so we have 4,000 companies in our network, and we try to solve this problem together. And one of the big issues is we all know we need to move to an agriculture that is regenerative. So an agriculture that after the food has been grown, the soil is healthier, the water and the air quality are better, the biodiversity is thriving, etc. The problem with this is it's going to cost money, because for now we're in a system where we have monoculture, we have a lot of synthetic fertilizer, etc. So we need to change system, and to change system you need money. And the food and the fashion industries are very important stakeholders of agriculture, and they're both setting quite ambitious targets towards how much regenerative agriculture should be scaled, and they don't really know how they're going to reach these targets. So what we did is we're like, okay, well, we're going to put the finance world, the fashion world, and the food world together in a room for 4 hours and brainstorm together how we could invent new buying models for farmers. So for example, in today's farm, you might have just wheat. A farmer might just sell wheat. In tomorrow's world, the same farmer in a regenerative world will sell wheat and oat and peas, and will have livestock, etc. So you have a lot more diversity. So you need to make sure all of these ingredients have somewhere to go, and you need these industries to realize that they need to redesign their products. So having everybody in the room was so transformative, because they could, again, not play the blame game, and we've seen they were so excited. So I'm really hoping that in 6 months I can come back and tell you that we've already solved it, and regenerative agriculture is solved, but at least we're on the way.
Well, This regeneration word is a great word, but it's also become buzzspeak. And, we see it everywhere: regenerative agriculture, regenerative design. There are other terms for this too, great terms. Virtuous agriculture, which is Andrea Illy of Illy Cafe's term, who I've spoke with about this and has been pioneering. But, you each practice regeneration through the work that you do, and I was hoping you might both speak. Maybe Matteo, you go first, how you specifically think about the true meaning of regeneration.
Yeah, there are many examples, and I think that we need to regenerate minds and culture to start with. As it doesn't seem a technological issue or a market issue. It seems like how you can really regenerate culture and relationship so that those things happen. I have an example that really struck me from Thailand. We were working with the government to support them to have new food policies, and we were looking for cases. And in Thailand there was this hotel which is called Sampran, and it's a high-end luxury hotel in the outskirts of Bangkok. And it was like, how comes that I need to buy my food from international suppliers? How comes that we have so much farmers around, like 30%, and in Thailand, and still they produce with chemicals and food that is not what I want to see. And he created a model to help the farmers to think differently about their future, to connect with the hotel and produce the food that the hotel needed by reassuring them economically, because that's also important, right? You need also to regenerate the economic model that are beyond the food system, the ecological system. Otherwise it's like a dream. Okay, so helping them to transition to this regenerative farms by putting their products into the hotel. But it was like, okay, but we cannot sell or present to customer every product. So the question was like, okay, how can we do with the products that are not beautiful? And he created different type of products, different type of offering for the customer, and the customer love it, because instead of being in an plastic environment like this hotel, they were feeling that there was a real product coming from people around them, and the farm became place to go to, and the people were proud of what they were doing. And instead of spraying chemicals, they were caring for their food, creating different products, scent, soap, bags with all the remainings, and then taking out of the hotel what was not used to feed back to the farm, and then creating markets for the people around. So this is the regeneration of the society, which is what we aim for, because we need to recreate those tissue that help people to feel part and have the same end together. There is one thing that I think is really important when we speak, that we need to give meaning to words, and I like that you started with company and the meaning of being together, because sometimes I feel people saying this is to be thrown away, and I always think, what, away where? There is no away. We are in a closed system, and throwing away means throwing here on my feet. Maybe you put it like a little farther, but then it's going to come out as some plastic that was eaten by the fish, or some element that polluted your environment. So it's here. It's not away. So buttare via does not exist because there's no via. Okay. So I'm feeling we need to rethink what is our society doing.
Well, I love that you mentioned that, because language is so important here. And, I'm a big believer, maybe I'm biased, I'm a journalist, so story is everything, but it really is. And I think how we tell these stories and the way that they revolve around time and the words we use, the language for them. Just take slow food, right? Slow food was this movement, relatively small movement of Italian farmers that now is a global movement. You could argue that Amazon is even a part of it, because they purchased Whole Foods in America, which is now one of our largest supermarket chains, and in many ways embodies a lot of the values even of the early slow food movement. Yes, there's contradiction. Yes, there's complexity. But I think that does really connect. And I'm bummed, unfortunately, John is having technical problems and not able to connect, because he's somebody who I think really doesn't embody the culture and a lot of the values that we could speak to. And just briefly do want to mention a little bit of his work so people can think about it and just look into what they're doing. But Ghetto Gastro is this culinary collective in the Bronx in New York. They just published their first book this month called Black Power Kitchen. And he and his two partners who are chefs, one of them actually worked here in Milan at Krakow. They're serving up this new sort of raw form of cultural ambassadorship. They're kind of unofficial representatives of their borough, and they do what's called sort of, as they term it, do-rag diplomacy. These are three very strong-minded, just incredibly articulate and very just like the energy and verve that they bring to what they do is incredible, and their whole effort as they see it is this sort of form of black liberation. They're using food as a tool, or food as a weapon, they almost call it, and it's coming in at this like social and cultural way of understanding this thing. So Gael, just to go back to where we were in the conversation, and as it does connect, how are you specifically thinking about regenerative? And I think it connects very much to this sort of farm to table, seed to button, these sort of ideas of understanding the root of the thing before the problems manifest in other ways.
Yeah, I mean, regeneration is a big word. And once you start digging, I'm at the stage where I know I don't know, you know, the stages of learning. I've discovered a lot about regeneration, but there's still so much to discover. So my work has been focused on regenerative agriculture. And if I was trying to figure out how do I explain this in the simplest way, is like, what if, imagine a world where the coffee you had this morning, every time you drink it, the world gets better from it. That's, you know, or your lunch, the lunch we're going to have soon. You know, if you know that when you're eating that lunch, you're helping to tackle climate change. That's what a regenerative food system would look like. And we're not there yet. But and then when you start looking into how that happens, it's really interesting. So we couldn't find for a report, we were looking for fantastic examples of like food products that would do that. Unfortunately, the food system is on its way, but it's not there yet. So we had to invent food products and to tell the story. And we say, okay, if we, back to like, it was a lot about futuristic thinking. We borrowed this and we're like, if in 2030 we step into a supermarket, what do we want to see? One of the products we came up with was called Silvos, a line of cheeses that are both dairy and walnut cheeses. And they come from a silvopasture. And a silvopasture is a fantastic example of a type of regenerative agriculture. So silvopasture is when you have cows or livestock in general, and trees living symbiotically on the same piece of land. So the cows provide fertilizer to the ground, and the trees provide shelter and shade to the cows. And when we modeled this type of ideal, so you have walnut trees that would produce milk from the walnut, and the cows would produce dairy milk. And when we modeled this, we realized that farmers, compared to traditional dairy farmers that would be in the silvopasture, they would see their greenhouse gas emission decrease by 90%. It's huge because the trees are capturing, you have a lot less cows in that world, and the trees are capturing the CO2. So we suddenly have a system that is regenerative by design, plus the price of milk is very volatile. So for farmers to only rely on the price of milk is quite, it's quite risky. So suddenly when we're designing this product that includes walnut as well, you are allowing the farmer to do what's right for its land, and you're also allowing them to diversify their income, which is regenerative in every sense of the word. And then at the end, I know that I want to eating my cheese because I never want to stop eating cheese. I know that I will, do good for the world.
Well, it's interesting you're talking sort of about plant-based and in New York, the restaurant 11 Madison Park during the pandemic became the first Michelin star plant-based, fully vegan plant-based menu. They just actually became the first restaurant in the world to have 3 Michelin star as a vegan restaurant. If you talk about the top-down trickle effect, I think the same thing happens with luxury fashion companies making decisions that then trickle down into those systems. How do you think about something like this, like 11 Madison Park having this sort of significance culturally, but also shifting to this new method of thinking and working. What sort of impact do you think that could have on the food systems we're talking about?
Should I? Yeah. I mean, so I think that it goes back a little bit to this idea of design and the power that designers have to change the world, really, because this linear system I describe has been designed. Waste is a failure of design, or it's a design decision, or an indecision, but an indecision is a decision. And so I think if there's one thing I want you guys to understand is that design decisions have a ripple effect throughout the entire system. So the decisions that you're making when you're designing, whether it's a clothes, a chair, a system, a service, or a restaurant, will have effect upstream to your suppliers, the people you're buying from, because you're signaling a certain type of demand for a material, a practice, and it will have effect downstream to your consumers, to your customers, that will, eat that food or wear that garment. And that makes all the difference to start thinking that way, because then you realize that, sometimes I feel designers think that, we're not the people with the money, or, the decisions are made at CEO level. No, actually, you can make such a difference. We started a project called the Jeans Redesign, with 100 different companies, fashion brands, and we set up a guidelines. We set them together. That's what we do. If we ever invite you, you're going to be sat together and locked in a room until we solve the problem. So we looked at a series of guidelines that what would a circular pair of jeans look like? What would it need to be? You need, for example, what kind of cotton would you use? How would it be produced in terms of agriculture? Then you need to be monomaterial, because you need to think about how it's going to be recycled. So you need to be able to have no stretch. So you wouldn't have stretch jeans. We take away the rivets. There's a lot of features of design that you need to think of. In order to create that circular jeans. They're live now. You can buy them in 100 different brand stores. Maybe some of you have been part of this project. And so all of this to come back to your question of the intent of design is what's going to define what's possible. Because if you have a jeans that has not been designed to be repaired, that has not been designed to be recycled or taken apart, you can't do anything with it. So the first intent of design is what's going to define what you're able to do in the rest of the system.
Do you want to go quickly, or we only have 5 minutes, so I have one question that ties to this, but if you have something you want to say.
I will follow up on this because design in Italian is progettare, thinking forward. So it's really the inside part of design that we need to work on. So for that we created a methodology which is called prosperity thinking, that links back at the beginning of the design process what is possible from the world standpoint, and what is in a way acceptable for people, and that's green space is what we need to target. And this it's the goal of every designer and every company that needs to operate on this world today, to include at the beginning of the process what design is, think forward and think about the effect that you have, systemic effect that you have when you produce what you need to produce.
That's the perfect segue. So today's talk is design thinking in action, and I don't know about everybody in the room, but I'm kind of tired of hearing the word or phrase design thinking. Drives me crazy. I think at one point a couple years ago, if I heard one more person say it, I was probably going to scream. And it's a little cringy, but there's at the heart of it, design thinking is a great core intent. And Matteo, you actually attended Stanford, went to the D School, the very place where a lot of this thinking came out of from the founder of IDEO, who started the school. So I wanted to ask, how do you each practice and think about design thinking, however you define it, and how does it manifest in the work you both do?
Design thinking, some people thought that it was like a design practice. At the D School, it's not. It's not about, how designers should work. There are great schools in Milan and in many other parts of the world that train great designers. Design thinking is for the rest of us. It's for business people, for engineers, for social scientists, for artists, for people who want to collaborate and have this idea of thinking forward, and understand the effect of the investment we are doing. Vitruvius started 2,000 years ago thinking about how to design buildings and what is the effect the building has on, the rest of the city and the rest of us. But, this is the idea that we need to understand. It's not, it's the job of the designer, because without us, academics, entrepreneurs, brands, companies, the designer is like disabled. It cannot, work to create a better future. Maybe it can create some, interesting, concept or idea, but, to make it requires this language, and this language is the language of needs, the language of, understanding human needs, and what we added together with planetary boundaries. And we need to keep that in balance. So, design thinking was a great understanding of this new language to speak about the future. Now we need to evolve, to put planet in, and evolve beyond human centricity, because otherwise we create a fantastic product then will kill us, and that's what we should avoid. And
someone once told me that human-centered is maybe not a good thing if we're the ones creating the problems.
Yeah, so this is the major breakthrough concept that we need to bring home. Like, in order to collaborate, we need to create these areas where designers are not let alone, because we are all designers.
Gael, let's close on your thoughts.
I agree and disagree. So I'm a designer by trade or by background, and I agree with you on the design thinking. I understand where it comes from, and it's helped me in my career, but I think for me design is a craft. It's something that you've honed, it's something that you've practiced, and you can go like very deep in it. And the thing is, I think it connects back to like this idea of everything has been designed, therefore everything can be redesigned, and that's kind of the good news, right? You can't, and when saying design is important for the circular economy, you can't design an economy, but what you can design is the elements of that economy. You can design the products, you can design the services, you can design the systems with intention that are building that economy. And for now, what I'm seeing is the craft that designers have developed is used to sell a lot of linear world services, products, and systems. Whereas I would love to see is that the same craft in marketing, the same craft in this beautiful curated experiences, this amazing products that we've managed to create around this idea of circular economy. Can we create the most beautiful circular products and circular experiences? And that would make design the centerpiece of creating that future that we want to see. But it's super interesting, actually, just back to human-centered design being the problem. That makes me think about a work by Superflex. I think they were part of the Museum of the Future. It's one of my design heroes. They're amazing. And they did something called the Banquet for Resurgence. It was at the Biennale last year. And they invited at a banquet all the species. So they created this table where you can see, there's space, there's the cutlery, or the equivalent of cutlery for an adult, a human, a child, but a rat, an insect, a bird, a wolf, and just to say, like, what would that look like if we were sitting?
I mean, we're all at the same table.
Yeah, exactly. And another reference. Sorry, I've read this amazing book called The Ministry for the Future by Ken Stanley Robinson. And he has this quote that really stuck with me on the theme of food and banquet. He's saying there is enough. In this world, there's enough for everyone to have a feast. Not just a frugal dinner, there's enough for everyone to have a feast. The problem today is that some of us are having an orgy. There's such a powerful thought.
We'll end there. Thank you.
Wow, che mattinata. Siamo arrivati alla fine di questa
Wow, what a morning. This morning has come to an end, and I really would like to say, wow, Beatrice, Leanza, all the speakers who actually allowed us to take a trip, a journey, because we detached from what we normally do. They projected us into the future. They explained to us that thinking about the future could help us reviewing, redesigning our present, learning from the future, as Alfred told us. We saw the Museum of the Future in Dubai. I've never visited it, so this is an outstanding project, a project based on collaboration. So all these pictures will become part of us. And Lonneke, that you left us, I'll speak Italian, but you left us with this metaphor of the dandelion, this ecosystem of people, ideas flowing fluently and being regenerated in the process. These are the metaphors we'll be taking away from this meeting. And I also thought of this concept of collaboration and cooperation. That is something that we are very much involved in as Alta Gamma. It has been repeated throughout the morning, and this cultural transformation that we are all living together is part of this. There are no longer egotisms. There is a new way of thinking, a new way of working. So what I can do is to thank the speakers, but also the board of Alta Gamma, who strongly believe in this project, has kept sponsoring it. It was definitely a complicated project. We have been working on it for 18 months now, together with Beatrice, Leanza, and also our thanks to the Alta Gamma team who worked throughout the night. There are always technical problems, but what is important is content. I believe that content was very rewarding, so I really would like to invite on stage not only Matteo Lunelli and also Beatrice Leanza for a big round of hands together with the speakers. Please, let's take a picture together, bearing witness to our ability to collaborate and our impromptu abilities. Thank you very much, all together here on stage. We really would like to thank you because we provided the rest of the audience with an international perspective, giving insights to our community as Alta Gamma Group. Can we all fit on stage? Yes. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for being with us today. Thank you.
Bene, fatto. Grazie a voi.
Thank you very much.